Welcome to the Switchblade Sisters Social Club, a true crime podcast where two sisters exploit their worst fears for your entertainment. You're welcome. I'm Dee.
And I'm Rhonda, and together we are the Sake Sisters. For more information, check out our website at www.switchbladesistersocialclub.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at Switchblade Sisters Social Club.
Thanks for listening. My name's Dee, and this is Rhonda.
Hi!
We are the Switchblade Sisters Social Club, where two sisters exploit their worst fears for your entertainment. And today, I am doing that hardcore because it's our last episode of the season.
Oh, it's been a fucking ride.
It has been a ride. It's been fucking intense, and
in every positive way. There have been no negatives.
It's just been amazing. And that was on our previous podcast, to be fair. Speaking of the previous podcast, we are taking a 4-week break. We will possibly be releasing some bonus episodes in that time, so really not having a break at all. But to keep your spooky meter high while we're gone, we will be re-releasing some of those previous episodes of We Knew the Moon with Rhonda as a co-host. So we've got an episode on hybristophilia, which is people that actively seek out relationships with people in prison.
And can we just say that was the episode where we had our negative review on, not a proper review, but negative feedback on YouTube.
But also one of the best reviews. We've had 2 good reviews. We've had loads of lovely reviews because our listeners are amazing, but 2 highlights from this season, even though it was a previous podcast, was Raphael Rowe having listened to that hybristophilia. So when we met him at CrimeCon a couple of months back now, when, in terms of when this comes out, he had listened to that episode.
He knew who we were, and I'll never get over it.
Yeah, he called us those 2 podcast girls.
I love him.
And the other amazing review was Colin Sutton, the legend that is. We don't need to even say who he is at this point.
Oh, and what he said was, it's the best in a crowded field.
So he listened to that Levi Belfield episode, number 2 in this season, and said it was the best one. So check that one out if you haven't already listened to it. So those are some of the highlights. I was going to ask you what the lowlights of this season are.
Okay, so there's no lowlights, but I just have some bad news. But we can get over it because there's been so many good things that we're okay with it. But basically, I check our Spotify and Apple ratings. And until today, we had only 5-star reviews. Except for that one bit of feedback on YouTube on that one episode where she said that we need to get our high horse. And fair enough. Okay, we'll own it. Whatever. We're not going to change, but we'll take it.
We never promised to be unbiased.
We received it.
It was noted.
We mulled over it.
We talked about it a lot.
We'll bear it in mind. I can't say that we're going to change our behavior. But anyway.
Oh no, what's our review now?
Okay, so it's not terrible news. We're at 4.8. But that one person, until today, we were 5-star. That one person must have left us a shitty rating on Spotify to bring our average down. But again, we can get over it. It's a learning experience.
I bet that's one of my exes.
I must be. Because everyone else likes us. We hope. But yeah, we can get past it because we're not for everyone, and maybe they just don't like us, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's all right.
Can I just also say, how fucking great is our theme tune? Every time I hear it, I'm like, fuck yeah. Oh, every time I hear it, it gets me in the fucking mood. Oh, no. I love it.
Went to another amazing Steve Gaskin talk. Fucking love that guy. Check him out. Crime Squad on Instagram. The Crime Lab. The Crime Lab. Yeah.
Another one of our friends at the show.
He told me.
Mm-hmm.
He said in his talk.
To you personally.
The UK has 1 serial killer to every 37 serial killers in the States.
Oh, fuck. Considering we're such a small country, that's weird, right? Why are you thinking it's weird?
that for every serial killer we have in the UK, they have 37.
Oh, you see, okay, because I'm seeing it as we have a shit ton here proportionally. You're seeing it as they have a shit ton in the States. We've got 37 times more. I'm seeing it as, considering we're a fucking, not even the size of a state, that's a lot proportionally.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a lot of serial killers all around, which
more
is bad.
than you want.
He talked as well about the IQ of serial killers. It's a myth.
Okay.
It's a myth that serial killers have a higher IQ.
I'm interested to know about their EQ as well, how that relates to their EQ.
I mean, he didn't touch on that, but yeah, that would be interesting. But listen, so we know
because there's a decline in it globally. Anyway,
so the way the IQ system is set up is that 100 is the average.
Yeah.
The average UK serial killer, their IQ is 90, but where their crimes are more violent, they tend to have higher IQs.
I really need to know why.
Terrifying. Well, I think it's going to be touched on more in a book coming out by Steve Gaskin and Colin Sutton.
Oh, what a fucking collab.
They're gonna have to get those legends back on the show when their book comes out.
I don't think my nervous system could cope with both of them. Oh my God.
It will just be us squealing a lot, wouldn't it?
Oh my God. Do you know what? I love them both. I love them both. And we have such a different rapport with both of them. Like Steve Gaskin, like I feel like I got to be on the straight and narrow with Steve Gaskin because he's more strict. And he also was a teacher. So he's a police officer and a teacher.
Whereas Colin's just a fucking
I just
laugh.
want to flirt with it.
But Steve, during his talk, he said a quote, and I wrote it down word for word because I knew you would love this, right?
Yes.
So Steve Gaskin.
I love a soundbite. Tell me.
Right. Steve Gaskin, open quotes. If you witness violent acts, you learn a valuable lesson in how to be dominant and violent. You are either born violent or you learn it. But he specified you have to witness that violence in person, not through video games, not through music. Remember when Columbine happened, that horrible shooting when we were at school,
music, video games,
and they blamed Marilyn Manson, blah, blah, blah. There's been loads of other shootings where they blame video games or whatever. And it's like, there are billions of people that listen to violent music, play violent video games and do not go and shoot people. You know, it's almost like a coincidence that these people that are predisposed to doing it, of course, they also like to have music that talks about that kind of shit. So, yeah.
So he's suggesting that people were raised in that.
Yeah. Okay. For the most part, they witness it.
Yeah.
And that's how they learn. They learn that that's how you get ahead. Or that's what you do when you don't get what you want.
To exert dominance.
Or, exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
yep.
Let me ask you a question. In the UK, what do you think is the most common murder weapon?
I'm going to say a knife because knife crime is the biggest problem.
Yeah, specifically a bread knife.
Okay. So domestic happens in the home.
Well, I mean, yes, in the home, but also people can take their knives from home.
What the fuck is a bread knife? I thought a bread knife is
it's like serrated, isn't it? So you can slice the bread. One
of those, yeah.
And he also, these are just like key interesting facts that I took from his talk. Surprise, surprise, a higher reward increases the chance of solving a crime. Yeah. There's actually statistical proof that it does help.
Money talks.
Yeah. I just wanted to say also that we have an audience survey out.
What do you mean we have an audience survey?
Well, I've built an audience survey.
Okay.
Go and we'll post links on the socials and on the website and everything. But do please, it'll be in the show notes as well. Do fill it in. Let us know how we're doing, what we can improve on, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, we do want feedback. This is why we often post on stories. We post polls on stories. We do want feedback because at the end of the day, we don't do a podcast for self-indulgent purposes. We do it for...
I mean, it's a bit of that, but it's also...
Of course we enjoy it.
But we would enjoy it more the more you guys enjoy it. So...
Yeah, it's for our audience. It is for our audience. And that is genuinely what keeps us going. We take our Fridays off work so that we can record the podcast, research the episodes, and we do it for you. So we want to know that we want to know what you want.
We say we take it off work, but like this podcast is slowly becoming our main job, podcast and related stuff, but it still feels like taking a day off work because we fucking enjoy it so much.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, look, on that note, I want to get straight in, so no more chit chat because this is gonna be a bumper.
Oh, okay. I'm ready. Let me get comfy.
You're
okay,
not
let's go.
ready.
Am I not ready?
Tell me the fucking story.
Tell me the fucking story.
I'm gonna cover the Wimbledon Common Murder of Rachel Nickell.
Shut the fuck up! I can't believe I didn't even think of that as one to cover. Shit, I watched a documentary on that. No, the dramatization. Fucking hell. Shit. Okay, go.
Yeah,
Tell
so...
me. What were you doing in Wimbledon?
I was going there for a client meeting. You're asking me what I was doing in Wimbledon because a couple of days ago I sent you a message saying I'm actually at the murder site.
I had a lot of things running through my head when you told
the case that I'm going to be recording with you next. So we'll post pictures.
Oh shit! There's one really sad fact about this case.
Oh,
that I don't like
there's more than one. This case is traumatic, and I knew a lot of it. There is, as you said, a dramatization on, I think, Channel 4 at the moment. I think it's called Deceit or something. Really good, but it is a dramatization because there's an undercover policewoman who's very actively involved in this case, but we don't actually know this person's name. And I don't know how actively she was involved in that show, and that show is very much from her perspective. So there is a lot of dramatization to it, if you know what I mean. It's kind of how they imagined the story from her side. So it's very good, but don't take it as gospel, basically. So my sources are in the show notes, but the main one is this book, The Wimbledon Common Murders, the shocking story of how an innocent man nearly got sent down for life. And that innocent man is Colin Stagg. So I also got his book, Pariah, Colin Stagg. So this one is by David Kessler, and the other one is obviously by David Stagg. I should state that David Kessler is clearly very pro Colin Stagg. So am I, to be honest. And obviously, well, I say obviously, hopefully you guys will be by the end of it, because it's actually really hard not to be when you read about this case and with all the hindsight and knowledge that we have now. But I just want to make it clear again that this is an unbiased, impartial account, but Colin Stagg has been cleared, and it's important to remember that this man is entirely innocent of the crimes that he got accused of, and it ruined his life. And when I say ruined,
did they find the murderer?
Yes, they did. But just the way this whole case was handled, I didn't have any idea. So I should say, this happened in the 90s. You and I were kids. I just about remember the murder. I don't know if you do, because you're a couple years younger than me, but we definitely remember the fallout from it. It happened very close to where we were living at the time. We grew up in Chiswick. Wimbledon is really close. And this case went on and was in the media for a long time because of everything that's happened. So, all right, I'm going to start with Robert Clive Napper. I'm going to call him Napper. I'm not sure if it's Naper, but I'm going to call him Napper. He was born in Southeast London on the 25th of February, 1966. He was the oldest child of Brian, who's a driving instructor, and Pauline. He had 2 brothers and 1 sister. He was the oldest. Quelle surprise, Brian, the father, was violent towards them, especially towards the mum and Robert. Eventually, Pauline, the mum, divorced the husband, but her health had deteriorated really badly, mainly because of the abuse. So the kids ended up spending a lot of time in foster care. I mean, it's not a great start, is it? Robert started skipping school. He started shoplifting. At the age of 12, he was abused, and his abuser went to jail for this. But I mean, that's such a tough thing for a kid who's already vulnerable, already experienced so much trauma in his life, and then to also have to go through a trial and relive it and so forth. I mean, this is literally a recipe for disaster in some capacity, isn't it?
It's how a lot of these stories have started that we've covered. Yeah.
Robert actually did receive counseling for 6 years, which is in the 70s, quite progressive. But Robert was changed after the abuse. He became introverted and, in quote, developed an obsession with tidiness. And apparently, this is an early symptom of psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
He was later diagnosed with psychosis, paranoid schizophrenia to be precise. He bullied his siblings and he used to watch his sister while she got changed.
Mm-hmm.
But just interestingly, there's no signs of bedwetting, playing with fire, or torture of animals, which we know is the triad, the dark triad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is very different to a psychopath. And what I learned as well, which I found really interesting, is that it's rare. It's extremely rare for psychopathy and psychosis to be found together.
Okay, so I need to know more about psychosis because also, as we've seen, like, for example, Jeffrey Dahmer, he didn't grow up in an abusive household.
Yeah.
But he was abused by the neighbor. And when we covered the Profile of a Serial Killer episode, there was a lot, we covered the nature versus nurture debate and how some people in a family that grow up in a home like that cope with it differently. Some become serial killers or abusers, and why. And so tell me more about psychosis. So
Napper, and spoiler alert, he is the one that actually killed Rachel Nickell, if you hadn't worked that out. He has paranoid schizophrenia, which is a form of psychosis, and which means that it's very unlikely that he is a psychopath. And he didn't show signs of psychopathy growing up. Obviously, we know this now that we've identified him as the killer, but it just plays a role later on, okay?
Mm-hmm.
August 1986, at age 20, Robert was arrested for carrying a loaded air rifle in public. He received a £10 fine and was released. So he's starting to get some, a bit of a criminal record. Meanwhile, 1988, so not meanwhile, because meanwhile. Meanwhile, in 1988, tennis coach and motorcycle courier Andre Hanscom was living in Balham in South London. Andre meets Rachel Nickell in July 1888. She was a lifeguard at Richmond while studying for a degree in English and history. She was living in Plumstead, southeast London, so near Balham. And in early 1989, she moved in with Andre and his two other housemates because they were going out, they were getting serious. She fell pregnant at some point afterwards and by accident and quit her studies to become a mum. Now, skipping over across to Colin Stagg, who also lived in South London. He was born in 1963. He was born in Fulham in London, South London. He was the second of 5 children. They moved to Roehampton in 1968, so when he was about 5. Colin's dad lost his job and his wife left him for another man very quickly after. Colin's dad was actually encouraged. He was left with the kids. Colin's dad was encouraged by authorities to put his children into care, but he was a family man, so he resisted. He didn't want to, which, good.
Mm.
From this point onwards, Colin's mum would jump between men and return home occasionally in between boyfriends. Colin eventually stopped seeing his mum because of how she treated the dad. Colin was introverted with an interest in astronomy and British history. And in 1986, his dad, who he was very close to, so when Colin was about 23, his dad died of a heart attack. This was a huge shock to Colin. It was like literally his best friend, Colin moved into the flat that his dad lived in, partly to feel close to his dad's memory. He also took great pleasure in taking over his dad's garden as well. Okay. So, sorry, this is a really tough case, so I'm just preparing myself. In August 1989 at 8:30 a.m., the first known incident occurs. This phrase, known incident, freaks me the fuck out because we actually have no idea how many incidents can be attributed to this case.
Mm-hmm.
A 30-year-old single mom called Jenny is upstairs in her house in Plumstead. She's drying her hair. She looks up and she sees an intruder with a knife in his hand. His face is masked. I mean, you'd freak out, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
He ordered her to the bed. He pulled her t-shirt over her head and secured it there. Jenny actually didn't fight because her kids were downstairs and she didn't want them to come up.
Mm-hmm.
So what a brave lady, right? She wanted this guy to just do what he needed to do and get the fuck out and not disturb her kids.
Mm-hmm.
So this intruder raped her. It's noted that he could not achieve a full erection.
Mm-hmm.
So, sorry, I just got a flashback to the episode of Friends where Rachel goes, "It's not normal. It doesn't doesn't happen to every man, and it is a big deal."
Thank God for some light relief in this episode, because honestly, it gives me chills whenever crimes happen in the house with kids.
Yeah, and all of these places are just so close to where we were living. It's just all Jenny could tell the police was that this guy was about 19. Remember, he was masked,
Mm-hmm.
and that he was maybe about 5'10" tall. A few weeks later, Robert Napper tried to take his own life through an overdose of pills. He confessed to his mum that some men were after him because he raped a woman on Plumstead Common. Sorry, just checking that my laptop is plugged in. Yeah. It doesn't even sound like he's talking about the Jenny case, but maybe a whole other case, right?
Mm-hmm.
A whole other rape that he's committed.
Mm-hmm.
His mother, fair play to her, calls the police to report this. But because of some confusion about the common name, which is sometimes called Winds Common
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes called Plumstead Common, they didn't realize that Robert was talking about a rape that he committed a few weeks ago. So like nothing came up on their radar about a rape at this time that he supposedly raped someone. So nothing came of this report, which is so depressing because that could have been the end.
Why would they have dropped it if they've got a confession or
confession to a man's mother, and then
Mm-hmm.
the mother calling the police? Like,
why would they leave that?
You know, we hear so many cases like Levi Belfield's mom who still protests his innocence and whatever. And here you've got a mom actually saying, look, my son is confessing to some horrendous things. So you would have thought they'd do a bit more digging, but apparently it was dropped for whatever reason. Unbeknownst to the police, Robert Napper goes on to become what is known as the Green Chain Rapist. So again, like Levi Belfield, he was the Hampton Hammerer until he escalated to murder. And like, you know, the Golden State Killer, he was known as the East Area Rapist. And it took a while for them to realize that he was the same one that later on started murdering. But he had escalated, you know? So Robert Napper becomes known as the Green Chain Rapist. The Green Chain is a series of parks and commons in Southeast London. Look, I mean, at this point, I was only on page 7 of this book, and I was like overwhelmed by how fucking awful this case already is, right? 2 months later, on the 10th of October, 1989, Rachel and Andre, their son Alex, is born. Rachel often took Alex and their dog Molly out to the park for walks. On January 1992, someone flashed her on Tooting Common, so she reported it to the police and just never went back to Tooting Common again. You could totally understand why if something happens like that, you just don't want to, you know, go back to the same place again. So instead, she started going to Wanstead Common, and there she got flashed again.
By a different person or the same?
Probably a different person.
Fucking hell.
So instead, she started very soon before she was murdered. She had started going to Wimbledon Common instead, which she felt was safer, ironically. But like, already this is too much flashing. Do you know what I mean? And all of these times she's there with her kid as well. Like, what the fuck is wrong with people?
Oh my God, I'd be terrified to just leave the house with the kids if that ever happened.
And I remember that time being very flasher heavy. It felt like it was almost more socially acceptable, or not socially acceptable, but like it wasn't counted as that big a deal. So I feel like people like that felt more empowered to do it.
Yeah, there was a period of time where I heard about it more.
Probably very little to come of it, you know? Oh, so on the 10th of March, 1992, after a 3-year break, I should say it's a break, but it's actually a break of victims reporting to the police. because there may have been more victims. But basically, after 3-year break in reported cases, the green chain rapist made a reappearance. 17-year-old Susan got off the bus in Lee on the high street. She entered an alley and was grabbed from behind. Her attacker held a knife against her stomach. He told her that if she struggled, he would kill her. He started fondling her, and when she did struggle, it made him angry, and so he punched her. Again, he struggled to get an erection in order to rape her, so he just kicked her in the head 6 to 8 times and just walked away. This was in daylight. So again, remember struggling to get an erection, right? Police
That's so scary, isn't it? Because we know not to walk around alone at night, but a lot of these crimes are happening during the day. Yeah. And apparently 7 a.m. is one of the most common times for rapes.
Police did find semen stains on her clothing and were able to link this attack to that of Jenny in Plumstead 3 years earlier, but they didn't have a match to a suspect on the system. 8 days later, 17-year-old Leanne was raped by the same guy. She left her home at 7:30 p.m. towards Eltham Palace. She was going for a walk after a fight with her family. She was attacked by a man with a balaclava and a knife. He struggled to maintain an erection and rape her, which is good, I suppose, although I can't imagine it makes it that much less dramatic and traumatic at the time. But he did leave semen again, which matched to the previous cases of Jenny and Susan. Leanne worked on an artist impression, which apparently was fairly accurate. So, you know, poor women. On the 24th of May, 1992, 22-year-old Kathy was out with her 2-year-old in a buggy in Eltham, again, southeast London, when she was attacked. The attacker put a rope around her neck and hit her in the head several times and raped her. So you can see that Robert Napper is incredibly busy at the time. His crimes are escalating in frequency as well as in violence. Kathy also helped with an artist impression, but she said that he was much taller. She said he was like 6 foot, when the other women said that he was a little bit shorter. So this was a confusing factor in the case, which unfortunately probably contributed to some of the delays in catching the guy. All right, so back to Colin Stagg, right? 15th of July, 1992. Colin Stagg wakes up at 6 a.m. for his paper round. He's not 12 years old. He's a grown man at the stage, but he has a paper round. He takes his dog Brandy to the newsagent to pick up his papers. He does his round and then he goes home after breakfast. He got ready to go out again at 8:30 a.m. despite having a massive headache, but he always took his dog Brandy for a walk on Wimbledon Common. They went to the Common, they did a little tour, but because of Colin's headache, he didn't do a full walk and came home around 9:15, 9:30. He took some paracetamol, had a cup of tea, and fell asleep on the sofa watching TV. Between 9 and 10 a.m. on the 15th of July, that same day, Rachel Nickell drives to Wimbledon Common with her nearly 3-year-old kid, Alex, and her dog, Molly. She parks at the Wimbledon Windmill Cafe, pics on the socials, because that's where I was. They were then seen by a man called Roger McKern by the windmill. There's an actual windmill in Wimbledon Common, and there's a cafe there and everything, and that's where one of the main car parks is. Then at 10:35, Michael Murray comes across Rachel's body with Alex clinging to her, crying, "Mummy, get up."
This is the horrendous fact.
Yeah.
Oh,
So it's
God.
2-year-old
That's what I can't
kid
get over.
crying, "Mummy, get up."
There. Oh,
yeah.
Fuck. Honestly, I can't get over that.
But can I just remind you, she's seen at 10:20. Her body is found at 10:35. It's a small window. Colin returned home at 9:15, 9:30.
Can I also just ask, when I watched a dramatization on Channel 4, they portrayed him as having learning difficulties. Was that just for the dramatization, or was that
Colin?
Yeah.
He's simple. I don't know. They didn't really talk about him having any learning difficulties or any.
Oh, so they didn't. Okay. I wondered if that was for just for the dramatization, or whether that was fact, and also
in the dramatization they made him sound weirder than he comes across in his book. I know his book's probably ghostwritten or
and
whatever.
then also I wondered if he did have learning difficulties, what factor that plays in his vulnerability.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe he did, because, you know, he's older than us, so definitely of a generation where you weren't tested for autism or other things.
That's what I wondered when I was watching the.
But he is definitely a little odd and a loner and stuff. But like the amount of people that can be described as this, do you know what I mean? Okay, so like I said, it's a 15-minute window that she is murdered in between being seen alive and found dead. So Michael Murray, this man that came across the dead body, picks up the kid and takes this kid away from the scene because it's clear the woman is dead and that she's been raped because her trousers and her pants were around her ankles.
What happened on Wimbledon Common?
I know, it's awful. Stephen Francis, a mounted park ranger, was notified and he went straight to the crime scene. He noticed that Rachel's throat had been cut and there was nothing left he could do. So he stepped away, like basically she had passed, right? So he steps away to make sure there's no contamination of the scene. The police arrive at 10:50, so 15 minutes after her body is found. So these timings are so close, you know, and that means that forensics are on the scene like really quickly and stuff, which must be a luxury. Like that can't happen that fast, you know. It's giving me major Emily de Lagrange vibes because remember it was a 15-minute time slot between her entering the green alive and being found, which is just spooky and obviously very good for the investigation if that information is used correctly, which you will see it is not. Some people say they saw someone running away, but that the timings don't line up. There were other witnesses that said they saw a strange man walking around and washing himself up in one of the ponds and jumping in and out of the bushes. Lots of confusing eyewitness accounts. I mean, remember, this is like a busy green, a busy common, you know, lots of dog walkers, lots of people bringing their kids, lots of people crossing it to go to work at this time, you know. Meanwhile, Colin gets up from his nap and wants to take his dog Brandy out for a proper walk because he feels like he loves his dog, right? He feels like he didn't give her a proper walk earlier because he had this headache. So he gets up and he goes to the park. At the park gates, the police officer says that he's not allowed to go in because a body had been found. Colin was shocked and told the police, I was on the common earlier that morning. So the police took his name and number in case they needed to question him later. And at this point, Colin thinks, well, that's it. If they want more information from me, they'll find me. I gave my details. Now, there's some confusion about when this exchange with this police officer at the gate actually happened. It was with a police officer called PC Couch. And there's been various timings given between 12 and 1. And the reason why this is important is because of how Colin knew certain things afterwards. Because he goes to the butcher, he goes to the newsagent, he tells them that like a body was found on the green, etc., etc. But like this was big news, so everyone's gossiping about it. The newsagent already knew about it. Someone else had already told him, you know. But the confusion of the PC's timings means that he is claiming that their conversation happened later. So how did Colin know that a body had been found? But it's like, first of all, the police officer got the timings wrong. Second of all, people are already fucking talking about it in the local area. You know, they would have seen the police. They would have seen what's going on. So Colin went home. He had his lunch and he tried for a third time that day to get Brandy a good walk. He bumped into a neighbor, Lillian Avid, and they discussed finding the body on the green as well, which you would, wouldn't you? A fucking murder happened on your doorstep that morning. Everyone would be
anything happens in your local area and that's all anyone's talking about. And
everyone would be like, oh, I was just there, or oh, I knew her, or oh, I saw her. Like people do that. Okay, I'm going to introduce, listen to this. Senior lecturer and consultant at the Department of Forensic Medicine at Guy's Hospital in London, Richard Shepherd, arrives on the scene. That's Richard Shepherd, who I recently saw at CrimeCon.
Oh, yeah, he's made several appearances now in episodes.
So within a couple of hours of the actual murder, and again, I wonder how often they have this opportunity to be there so quickly after the murder has actually happened. So he's there at 12 18, so like 2 hours, right? There's an inspection, and then the body is taken to St. George's Hospital for a post-mortem examination. Shepherd tried to determine the time of death through body temperature. He took the body temperature. Okay, so this is where there's a bit of confusion, and maybe I should have asked him about this on CrimeCon. He noted, like, obviously they need to know the temperature of the day, you know, to be able to work out how fast the body would decompose, et cetera, et cetera. He noted it at 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Do you remember when we first moved to the UK, how they were still counting everything in Fahrenheit, and we were like, what the fuck does that mean? Never mind how hot that actually is, but basically the Met Office says that the temperature was actually 72. So where he noted it at 65, the Met Office apparently says it's 72 degrees. So 7 degrees difference, which is weird, because it means that based on these numbers, the time of death would be 6 p.m. the previous day.
Okay, so who was wrong?
Well, we know that she was alive at 6 p.m. the previous day, and we know she was alive at 10:20 that morning. So he then used rigor mortis, the stages of rigor mortis, to determine that the murder actually happened between 4 and 11 a.m. on the same day that the body was found. Is that Jim coming in doing a forward roll? Shepherd claims that the amount of body loss threw off the calculations. There were blue synthetic fibers not correlating to anything Rachel was wearing, found under her nails, but apparently not all samples were properly analyzed. For example, there were also fibers around her vagina, and we don't know if they were from her trousers or from the killer. Her clothing apparently was not checked for foreign fibers either, which just seems weird.
So why were they dropping the ball?
I don't know. And again, I will say that this guy, David Kessler, is very biased. So I didn't find more information about this. So it's possible that this isn't accurate. This is a bit, this is graphic. So apologies. We don't really like to focus on the actual injuries, but this is important. So skip forward a little bit if you don't want to hear this, because it is hard. Rachel was stabbed 49 times. And she had been raped anally with an object.
How did this happen in broad daylight?
It was literally
a
frenzy. Now, I will say Wimbledon Common does have a lot of like wild areas. So this was off the main path. So it was spooky when I was walking there, because you've got a main path, and then just there is like wildlife that you wouldn't even see a person in there. It's just bonkers. And this happened so quickly, right? So she was raped with an object, anally raped. Shepherd thinks that the handle of the knife might have been used, as there was also an impression on the buttocks. But if this is the case, he probably would have cut himself on the blade. There was some DNA on Rachel's inner thigh, but it was too small to test using the technology available at the time. And at the time being the key phrase here. So I think you know what's coming. Shepherd used a technique called nuclear magnetic resonance to take an image of one of the knife wounds in the liver, but the liver is usually full of blood, and Rachel had lost a lot of it, so the liver had shrunk, as did the size of the wound. So basically what I'm saying is they were looking for a much smaller knife than was actually used. The police were looking for a knife that was 9 centimeters long by 1.5 centimeters wide, but actually it must have been bigger. And there was a knife found by the scene, but because it was 21 centimeters long and 2.1 centimeters wide, Shepherd dismissed it as a possible murder weapon.
And why do you think the killer would have left it there?
And maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was genuinely not the murder weapon, but it was dismissed based off potentially inaccurate information.
God, you know what? I really don't know if I ever knew all these details.
No, I did not. And I haven't even got up to the really fucked up stuff.
Oh, God.
And the thing is, we've all fucked up at work, right? We've all done it, but it seems like you might have made a few mistakes in a row. And when we make a mistake at work, people's lives don't really depend on it, you know, literally. Our clients might act like it does, but it doesn't. So let's look at the inquiry, right? It was headed up by Superintendent Bassett and Chief Inspector Nick Wilkerson. So there are two way up here. But the third in command and the one who's in charge of the day-to-day running of this case and this investigation is Inspector Keith Pedder. This guy is problematic. You will hate him, and then you will feel incredibly sorry for him, and then you will probably go back to hating him some more. Police collect their eyewitness accounts from people on the green, and in particular, a woman called Jane Elizabeth Harriman. She's a solicitor's wife, so she's seen as a very worthwhile, worthy, reliable source, right? She's basically white middle class.
I hate that when they dismiss someone as a reliable witness because they, for those reasons. But anyway, for not being...
I mean, we talk a lot about victimology and how that affects how the case is handled, and also same applies to eyewitness accounts and so forth. She said she saw a suspicious man 3 times between 10 and 10:30 in the bushes. Now, I want to go back to something Colin said in our interview, where he was talking about how they weren't sure whether it was possible to have 2 perverts basically operating in Hampton and in Feltham so close together round about the same day. And I was like, we've been to a pub and been harassed by more than one pervert at the same time.
If you've been to Feltham ever, you know it's full of fucking dodgy people.
So basically, this could have been another person being weird and suspicious.
Yeah.
Because the fact that there might be 2 suspicious people in a big park at the same time does not surprise me.
No, especially since they seem to be fucking hotspots.
And also, this guy, he was acting suspiciously, but it basically means he was walking around. And it's like, do you just, in hindsight, think he was acting suspiciously because you now know there was a murder there? Do you know what I mean? He was seen in the bushes even though he didn't have a dog. Maybe he needed a wee. I hate when men pee in public, but they do it. And it doesn't mean they are necessarily murdering someone. Apparently he hid his face from her, and it's like, yeah, maybe he was embarrassed because he was having a wee. Maybe he was even doing something worse than that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there was someone else, that he was the murderer, right? But she says he was white, 5'10"ish, short brown hair, white t-shirt, long sleeves, with colored, like dark trousers and a dark bag. The third time she saw him coming out of the bushes, his belt was over his shirt. Superintendent Bassett, one of the high-ups on the case, calls in psychiatrist and villain of the story, Paul Britton. And I have a suspicion this guy might be at CrimeCon, the next one.
Oh, fuck. Okay. Tell me.
On the 28th of July, 1992. So obviously the murderer is the real villain, but this guy comes second. He's a clinical psychologist with a background in forensic psychology, and he drew up a profile of the killer. Now, we love a criminal profile, and we've heard of good criminal profiling, like in the Larry Jean Bell case. Go back and listen to that episode if you haven't already, if you want to hear awesome criminal profilers at work. Carrying on listening to this one if you want to hear how criminal profiling is done extraordinarily badly, because Paul Britton decides that the killer is a stranger to Rachel, mainly because Alex, the kid, was unharmed. So basically, if the person knew Rachel, then probably Alex would know him and therefore be killed.
Oh, okay.
It's like it's a possibility, but also she had a whole adult life. He's only 2 years old. It could be someone that she knew that Alex had never met before. Maybe he didn't have time. Maybe he got interrupted. He said that the crime was driven by sexual fantasy, and there's also a lot of debate about this. Was it sexual fantasy or was it rage? He said that the suspect was 20 to 30 years old, lived alone or with a parent. He was solitary, maybe into martial arts or photography, lived nearby, and didn't drive.
So where did he get the martial arts photography and didn't drive from?
I don't know.
Interesting.
He said that this was the first killing, but that there was a 50% chance he had a previous conviction for things like flashing. And it's like, oh, he's got a 50% chance of having X, Y, and Z. Seems like a cop-out. Because if you catch someone, and they don't. It's like, well, I only said 50%, you know? Paul Britton claimed that the killer had a sexually deviant-based personality, but his definition of sexually deviant barely describes a killer and actually kind of describes most men, especially in the 90s. He claims they like women, they view women as a sexual object. I'm just going to plug in my headphones because I think that I'm hearing a beeping that from memory means they're running low. So his definition of someone who's sexually deviant is that they like women, they view women as sexual objects. Again, not saying this is right, but lots of men do.
It's not unheard of. Fucking sad.
Hang on. Check my speaker. Sorry, my speaker's not. Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah, lots of men do view women as sexual objects, and it's wrong, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're capable of murder. Paul Britton says that they like anal and vaginal penetration, which again is not sexually deviant, really. It's just sex. They like sex.
And also, I mean, she'd been penetrated anally, so
yeah,
you know, it was the clue was there.
Yeah. He also claims that the murderer liked the submission of a female and they like role play, which is like, again, that's a kink.
That profile can fit a lot of men.
It's yeah. So he also said that they could go into a sexual frenzy, which could culminate in the killing of a female. It's like, I'll give him that one, but also no shit. That's why you're investigating a murder. So he did say, obviously, like a lot of criminal profiling, to be fair, that the suspect didn't have to tick all of these boxes, only some. But what that also means is that every man fucking fits in that category. Every man who's sexually active, or even not, likes sex. And
yeah, it doesn't narrow it down. It's really not a very specific profile, is it?
Paul Britton also categorically stated numerous times that the murder of Rachel Nickell is entirely separate from the green chain rapist attacks, that they were being perpetrated by two very different people.
And why did he think that?
I'll go into it. Meanwhile, 3 more incidents occurred linked to the green chain rapist. So this is going on simultaneously. One of these incidents, the lady escaped because her dog, a corgi, bit the attacker. So it's like, good dog. Good dog. You would fucking get that dog a steak that night, wouldn't you? Another one of the attacks was a woman with a buggy who was followed by a man. And again, it's like this being attacked with the kid around and how that doesn't seem to put the person off is
I'm really wondering
not
if it's a
that
fucking
common.
factor. Yeah.
She got help from some people and the man ran away. There was another incident where the man tried to enter a home. And you remember, these attacks, these green chain rapists, has already been linked to an attack in a home. Jenny, the first known incident. Do you want to hate the Sun tabloid even more?
God. Fuck. What else? What else?
Here we go. American forensic psychologist Robert K. Ressler was coming to the UK to promote his book, Whoever Fights Monsters, covering his time at the FBI Behavioral Science Unit at Quantico. I think he was the one that Mindhunter, one of the TV shows is based on him. The Sun had the right to publish extracts, you know, it was like sort of serializing some of the book. So when he was in the UK, they arranged for an interview. They arranged it at Wimbledon Common without telling him it would have anything to do with the Rachel Nickell case. He got suspicious when they asked to take pictures of him at the crime scene.
And what was their agenda for that?
They just wanted to have like a scoop, right? Some intel. But it's like, why don't you tell him, can we interview you about this case? No, they were doing it sneakily. He got suspicious. He cut the interview short. The next day, the Sun publishes an article with extracts from his book, but they published it under the headline, Rachel, Sun flies in, Silence of the Lamb, FBI man. And they claimed that the stuff he had said about another murderer, was actually with regards to the Rachel Nickell murderer.
They have no integrity with their journalism, and we shouldn't even use the word journalism to describe that rag.
And to understand how dangerous that is, this is a murderer still on the loose. So rather than giving the public key information, factual information that might help them protect themselves, potentially give the police a lead on the actual murderer, they're giving people false information and putting lives at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Even after Ressler complained, they did the same thing the next day, where they published other quotes and claimed again that it was by Rachel. It was about Rachel. So I'm going to say that whole line again. Even after Ressler complained, they did the same thing the next day, where they published other quotes of his and claimed it was about Rachel again. Just fucking scum. Fucking scum. At me, the sun. I don't care. Because of this, Ressler got in touch with the police dealing with the case and volunteered a genuine profile. So he's obviously like, fuck, you know, the sun is like warping public perception on this case. Let me actually volunteer to help, bless him. So he got the case files. He didn't get the actual profile that Paul Britton had made up, but he did get like a summary of it, an evaluation by Paul Britton. I don't really know what the difference is, I guess, but Ressler wrote his own profile, which was 7 pages long and had 23 points on it. Ressler went into so much more detail in his profile, and his profile didn't match 75% of men like Paul Britton's did. Paul Britton said that the offender had a deviant-based personality. Ressler goes further and says he would be known to neighbors and associates because of his odd or strange behavior and appearance. Ressler says he's probably borderline schizophrenic, immature, and seeking friendships with younger people, maybe even children. He might have mental health issues. And it's interesting because schizophrenia is a form of psychosis. And we know that Napper had schizophrenia, and Ressler has identified that this person might be schizophrenic, whereas Paul Britton says that he's a violent sexual psychopath. And we know, as I mentioned before, that psychopathy rarely happens at the same time in someone with psychosis. So they're basically describing two different people, which is interesting, isn't it?
And I wonder why.
Ressler thinks that the child, Alex, who, you know, was there sadly when Rachel was murdered, was spared because the offender had a tormented childhood.
Okay.
He had a full-blown mental health issue and would appear unwashed, starved, and unable to care for himself, which doesn't match Colin at all, FYI. Colin was fairly functional and clean, you know? And
you even said obsessed with tinyness.
No, that was Napper.
Oh, shit, okay. Cut that out.
On the 28th of August, 1992, a neighbor dobbed Robert Napper in. And he was asked by the police to give DNA to eliminate him from the Green Chain Rapist inquiry. So a neighbor says, I think this guy is the Green Chain Rapist. The police asking for DNA. Robert Napper agrees to this, but then doesn't turn up to the appointment. They don't bother chasing him up because of this discrepancy on the height between the attacker. There were claims that he was 5'10", 6'3", etc., and Robert was 6'2". So because of this discrepancy, they decided he wasn't a priority, and they didn't bother following up on the fact that he had agreed.
This is now the second time. The first time when his mother called in.
And there's so much information about how eyewitness reports are unreliable because of how our mind works. But especially if you are literally being sexually assaulted at the time. So obviously they want to get as much information from these women as possible. But of course, there's a possibility that they will get some facts wrong.
There's been twice now that he's been reported to the police.
Yeah.
The same person.
If he's volunteered DNA and they suspect him of such serious crimes, fucking follow up if he misses that fucking appointment. Anyways. Okay, so 17th of September, 1992, Crime Watch featured the Rachel Nickell case and the two EFITs from previous witnesses. but one was a long-haired man and one was a short-haired man. So these are e-fits for people of interest, people they haven't managed to identify that were on the green, on the common at the time, right? With one of them potentially being her murderer. There were loads of leads that came in, and 4 people called in giving Colin Stagg's name. So Colin was arrested for murder. On the 18th of September, the day after the Crime Watch episode went out, against Colin's legal rights, they questioned him in his home when they should have taken him to the police station and recorded it with his legal counsel present. So this is the thing. He lived locally. He fits the profile that this criminal psychologist has given them. 4 people have given him, given his name. So I totally understand them bringing him in for questioning. Great police work there. But what happens after this point is so dodgy, right? So first of all, it starts with them questioning him without being recorded, without any legal assistance, etc., etc. Police asked Colin why he didn't come forward if he had been on the common that day. And he said he did. He gave his name to a police officer at the gate that day and just assumed he'd be contacted if needed, which to me seems totally reasonable. Mm-hmm. He hadn't seen anything. Do you know what I mean? He didn't have any key information. He just said, like, if you need to speak to me, let me know. Like, what more would he have done? They searched Colin's house. This stuff makes me so sad, right? He was interested in paganism and Wicca and the occult, and he had some of this sort of paraphernalia lying around the house.
Which is not weird in that era.
Not weird in that era, not weird now. Does not mean you're capable of murder.
It was popularized in the 90s, you know? And it was very much a part of, like, a lot of films, mainstream films that were coming out. I mean,
we fucking had this shit around.
Yeah,
and to be honest, one of the main tenets of paganism and Wicca is respect for nature and human life and life in general and the cycle of life. So, you know, if anything, it makes me less likely to think someone's a murderer. Mm-hmm. It's definitely not proof on its own, right? But obviously these police officers are like, fucking weirdo, totally matches the profile. I mean, he had a black wall in one of his rooms with chalk drawings on it, which to me just sounds really fucking cool, right? Like now this would be Pinterest chic. People would have it on their fucking Pinterest boards. He had an altar in his room to various ancient pagan gods. So of course, all of Colin's clothes are taken for testing. He's taken to the station. He's questioned for 14 hours over 3 days, and most of the questions revolved around Colin's lifestyle. Mm-hmm. Not what he's doing on the day, his links to the common, or his links to Rachel Nickell. Paul in Britain is on the phone advising the police during this entire time. But again, like I said, the police investigating the crime and the suspect's alleged connection to it shouldn't be on a fishing expedition. You know, trying to ask him things, trip him up, find out other weird shit about him to make him look more suspicious. That's not how an interrogation is meant to go. It's also weird that the duty solicitor that he was appointed as his legal counsel didn't step in at this point to defend his client and be like, hang on a minute, this isn't right. They asked him loads of questions about his religious beliefs, which is like, again, irrelevant. You know, it wasn't like a sacrificial murder or taking place in a religious ceremony or whatever. Lillian Avid, one of his neighbors, was a key witness. This is the one that he bumped into on the day of the murder, and they were discussing the murder. But she was like elderly. She was only interviewed 2 months after the murder, and she kept on calling Colin Tony, which is the name of one of his brothers. So she clearly didn't know who she was talking about, didn't remember, got things confused, was confusing different conversations, days, whatever. They interviewed everyone that Colin spoke to that day. For example, the newsagent and the butcher. But because of this time confusion, with the police saying these conversations happened before Colin spoke to the police officer at the gate when he tried to take his dog for a second walk, they're claiming, like, how could he possibly have known about the murder? But even if he had, like I said, the newsagent already knew about the murder. The word was already out there. But actually, these conversations happened after he found out about the murder from that police officer. So none of this is weird, you know? In the books and online, you could find quite a lot of stuff about the interviews, but I actually found them really hard to read, really hard to go through. I didn't want to like put you guys through this, but it was a lot of like, you did it, didn't you? Just admit it. Just confess.
Surely
like,
that's unprofessional, and surely...
Does that ever work? Do you just
are they
do
even
that?
allowed to do that? Are they even allowed?
I don't know, but it's like you do that for enough hours and someone will probably crack, right?
God, because you know what? When you're like in teaching, when you have to collect statements from kids over incidents, I know it's a entirely different thing. We're trained not to ask misleading questions.
Right? And
leading. Sorry, we're trained not to ask leading questions.
Yes,
because you're
so
putting
bear that in mind, because
you're
then
confusing people. You're putting words in their mouth. They think they're agreeing with you to please you, or because that's the right answer. I'm just really shocked that the police are able to ask leading questions.
And again, for hours at a time, right?
Mm.
Colin appeared on the news when he was filmed going into the police station for a police lineup, and this led to a woman coming forward. Her name is Julie Pines. A couple of years previous to this, she had placed a lonely hearts ad in the newspaper. Remember, it's pre-Tinder days.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to see if I could find this lonely hearts ad because I wanted to see if it was as funny as Belle Gunnis's. Remember, no triflers need apply. I doubt it would be though. In a little while, I'm going to cut for a break because I need more coffee. I like my throat. Colin replied that they exchanged letters, but then Colin sent her a sexually explicit one. It was a fairly tame fantasy involving fully consensual sex outdoors, but it was unsolicited by Julie and she didn't appreciate it. So she stopped writing to him, which is totally fair enough and naughty of Colin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bear in mind at this time, he would have been like early 20s and boys are stupid at that age, right? Not making excuses for him. But, you know, meanwhile, we're going to catch up with Robert Napper. Meanwhile, let's catch up with Robert Napper. I don't know how this guy is still on the streets as long as he was, because even if they never linked him to Rachel, he was already like bad enough. There was already seemed to be mounting evidence against this guy. On the 29th of October, 1992, so 3.5 months after Rachel's murder, Robert tried to get a printer to print 50 sheets of Metropolitan Police paper. So I think they mean by this like letter-headed paper, you know, so that he could write letters pretending to be from the police. So it'd be, you know, in my mind, I'm thinking he'd be like, you know, the police require you to come to this dark alley at midnight. Ooh, or God. I don't know, maybe just like you've received a fine, send a check to this address. I don't know. Anyway, the printer pretended to take the job, but he found it obviously suspicious. So he reported it to the police, and the police came to arrest Robert Napper when he came to collect the order. Just a little interesting sting operation there. They searched his home, Robert Napper's home, after this, and found a gun, ammunition, a crossbow, knives, etc., etc., etc. He's charged with 2 counts of possessing firearms and ammunition without a license. And like, bear in mind, finding guns in the UK is still quite shocking, and especially in cities.
I've really wondered, where do you get it from? Because it's not common in the UK.
It really isn't common. Like, I mean, sadly, we hear about it more and more, but it's really, really uncommon to hear about gun crime. And for someone to have a gun, like, people are allowed to have guns in this country. They obviously have to have permits, whatever, but it's more associated with hunting and so forth. It's super uncommon to hear about people having guns in the city, unless they're doing something really fucking illegal with them. He was charged with 2 counts of possessing firearms and ammunition without a license. And also, remember, this is his second conviction involving a weapon. So it's like, red flag, red flag. This is also after he's, you know, conveniently forgotten to come to his DNA appointment. So, you know, take it now.
Literally, they should be thinking it's only a matter of time.
It's like a comedy of errors, isn't it? They also found marked up maps with crosshairs and ominous hand drawings of the green areas. You know, the green chain. And they found like references to women being filthy bitches, etc. So it's like, clearly this is a sign of something going on here. Despite this, Robert got 2 8-week sentences to run concurrently, same time.
8 weeks.
If they'd bothered to look at the markings on the map more closely, they would have seen that several of them were linked to green chain rapist attacks.
So how the fuck did this go so wrong?
This guy was found with guns.
But how did it go so wrong? The confession is almost those fucking maps, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how did that slip through the net?
I don't know is the honest answer. I don't know. I'm not sure anyone knows, because it's I imagine it's a series of fuck-ups by not just one.
I always think if there's just that seed of doubt, fucking investigate it.
And again, he's found with motherfucking guns. His mum reported him for rape. Do you know what I mean? He has already come in as a suspect for the green chain rapist, and didn't come back to give the DNA evidence. So it's like, how is this not fucking? I mean, I'm guessing it's because a lot of this wasn't computerized at the time. We're talking early 90s, potentially different police departments, different police stations. Okay, so back to Colin. He took part in this lineup that led to Julie Pines coming forth to tell about this experience she had. And he was confirmed, in quotation marks, as being the man near the murder site within 5.5 minutes of the attack. So the police are convinced it's him. Again, we know how unreliable eyewitnesses can be, but obviously at this point I'm like, yeah, keep him on your fucking radar, investigate further, because this is enough to warrant that. Petter formulates a plan, a honey trap, if you will, based on letters to Julie Pines. The idea was either to eliminate Colin from the inquiry or to get him to confess. And the idea was that there be no fishing, no leading questions, nothing. That everything in this operation, which I'll go into details with, everything had to come from Colin himself. They couldn't be seen to be offering any incentive to inspire him to confess. But already, right from the outset, they're offering something, because they're offering up a female, a mate, a partner, a soulmate, And this female comes in the shape of Lizzie James in January 1993. So they're under huge pressure to fucking get this case solved, because, it's almost a year since the original murder of Rachel Nickell. Police let Colin think they are no longer interested in him. And then Colin gets a letter from a supposed friend of Julie Pine. You can find the text of the letters online. They're like fascinating, but they're fucking disturbing. But this lady, Lizzie James, says she found the letter with the sexual fantasy he had written to Julie when she was staying at Julie's house, and that she herself was interested in him. Colin replied instantly. Of course he did. I should say at this point, he's a 28-year-old virgin. Of course he motherfucking replied, right? So already it feels like entrapment. He's done this before, responding to Lonely Hearts letters, and now he's further isolated because he's been like publicly shamed as potentially being a murderer, Lizzie in the letter implies that Julie was a prude. She didn't imply. She outright said, my friend Julie is a prude. I'm much more your type, right? So again, implying that she is very sexually open, that she liked this sexual fantasy letter, and that she's not a prude. Colin understood that Lizzie wanted him to talk dirty to her, because she's basically saying that. He replies first asking for permission to do so. So it's like he's learned from his mistake previously, or he's matured in some way. It actually shows a lot of growth and emotional intelligence in my mind. It's like, okay, just to be clear, are you saying you want me to talk dirty to you? I want your permission, your consent before I go ahead and do this. But right from the start, you can see that Lizzie is directing the conversation, right? Here are some of the quotes from her letters. Tell me something that will send me crazy. Don't worry about upsetting me.
Yeah, it's coercion and manipulation.
Right? The letters Colin sent back were nothing alarming at first, really. Just about giving her pleasure, making her scream in pure ecstasy. I mean, hardly going to shock anyone, is it? And at some point, he says, she will be sore when he's done. I mean, I don't think that's bad at all, really. You know, that's just the thing people say, isn't it? But that's what Lizzie hooks onto, and she pushes him, saying that she has dark secrets that she longs to share and that have influenced her urges.
But how is this ethical? Would this still be ethical nowadays?
No, it wouldn't be ethical at the time either.
But I mean, would it be permissible? Ethical, we know it's not, but is it permissible then?
Well, that's the point. I'm going to get onto how they felt about this evidence, in quotation marks, when it got to court, okay? She says, so Lizzie in the letters, she says she wants to feel Colin all-powerful and overwhelming. So again, very much directing the nature of their...
It's giving him the answer she's looking for. It's
yeah, she wants to be in the submissive role, i.e. she's forcing him to talk in the same way as this criminal profile of the killer, right?
Yeah, it's giving
They're looking
the
for someone who likes the female in a submissive role. So Lizzie's trying to get him to talk about a sexual encounter where she's in the submissive role, he's in the powerful role. She says, so that I'm completely in your power, defenseless and humiliated. So not just in a submissive role, you know, with him taking the lead, but humiliating her. I mean, if that's not leading, Britain, who is behind this letter, behind these letters, accepts that perhaps he should not have used the word humiliated in this letter. But it's like, even without that, yes, that takes it to a next level, but even without that, she is leading the conversation towards, you know, S&M with Colin in the dominant role. And this guy is just trying to please her, you know? So all of these themes that Lizzie's introducing, they do not appear in the letters until she introduces them. Colin doesn't talk about being dominant sexually until she asks him and tells him that she wants that from him, you know? So he's, again, I think showing emotional intelligence in that he's tailoring the fantasies to what she's asking for, what she wants, you know? But Britain also claims he still met the guidelines set for himself, which I love. You ask about whether it's ethical or not. So basically, he's like, I set the guidelines and I am within my guidelines that I set myself. I didn't break any of the rules I set for myself, basically. Colin actually tried to instigate a sex talk with Lizzie in the dominant role. But this didn't meet the profile that Britain had created for the murderer. So Lizzie is just directed to not respond to these lines of talk. So she just doesn't, you can picture it. She just doesn't act excited by it. She doesn't mention it. And she hooks onto the other stuff that she wants to eke out of him. So Colin continues to take, again, what I think is the emotionally mature response of dropping the themes she's not interested in and exploring the things that she seems to be reacting more positively to. That seems like a healthy sexual attitude at this point, that Colin, not Lizzie, because she's not a real person, but you know what I mean? Do you think? Is it just me?
No, I agree. I'm just shocked at the manipulation and the... God, it's far beyond leading questions. It's telling somebody what you want them to say back to you.
Yeah.
So that you can elicit a confession.
Exactly. It gets worse. So, but what this means, though, is that Colin is entirely, like you said, taking the lead from her. And, you know, maybe he was burnt with the Julie Pines experience where he misread the situation and she stopped contacting him. But then Colin sends Lizzie a letter saying, I now have an idea of what you want. He then describes a scenario where he abuses her and calls her dirty names. He sent a follow-up letter 4 days later apologizing if he went too far and checking if she was okay. So, you know, he's clearly conflicted. He's not comfortable with this line of talk. and he was like doing it because she wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
Lizzie gives Colin a necklace with an occult looking ram on it and said that it was given to her. This is where it starts getting like, what the fuck? She gives him this necklace and says it was given to her by very special people. Basically, she starts implying to Colin that she was involved in a cult, because they obviously know that Colin is interested in the occult and stuff like that. So he seems to be more of a nature-based pagan than anything, and not a sort of like sexual cult member, which is what she's implying she was. So now he opens up a bit and he says he isn't a Satanist, but he's interested in the occult. Colin says he doesn't care what Lizzie's past involves. He would want her in his life, even if she was a mass murderer. Which to me is something you just say to get in someone's pants, or when you love someone, or when you clearly don't think they've ever...
And this is a really inexperienced guy.
Yeah.
Who is naive, childlike, potentially has learning difficulties, at least the way they portray
It's
him.
just something you say. Britain, though, so this sentence, I would want you in my life even if you were a mass murderer. Britain says that it shows he's happy to conduct the relationship outside of society's rules and regulations. Which is just,
I mean, you can
bonkers.
apply interpretation to so many throwaway phrases.
It's just a figure of speech. We were talking about this earlier. When you say, I love you to the moon and back, you're not actually going to the motherfucking moon and back. It's just, do you know what I mean?
It's a throwaway phrase. It's just...
Yeah. I mean, he clearly doesn't actually think she's a mass murderer. Anyways. Britain would have a field day with me because I regularly tell Paul to promise to stay with me, even if he's in this role. And that I want to crush him so hard into me that he becomes a paste and I can eat him so he's inside of me. I don't mean it.
I know.
And I also tell him if he dies before me and he wonders if I want him to be happy and move on. No, I don't. Stay miserable. Honor my memory. It's like fucking joking.
Yeah.
You say things.
I know. I'm sad for Colin. Honestly, I'm really sad. I want you to get to the bit where he gets released so I can.
I wish I could tell you the whole story ends happily, but it doesn't. Britain's belief that the killer would try to find out as much about Lizzie as possible so he could please her. So, sorry, say that again. Britain's belief is that the killer would try to find out as much about Lizzie as possible so he could please her. It's like, that's what you would want any of your boyfriends to do.
Well, why is that suspicious? What does that confirm for him?
None of it. So the police didn't think that this was entrapment, didn't think that this entrapment was going fast enough. So they upped their ante again. So Lizzie sends him a letter. They haven't met yet, by the way. Lizzie sends him a letter saying she has hurt people in the past and enjoyed it. Which is, again, a theme that Colin has never expressed off his own bat. So far, he's only ever gone so far as to say he wants to leave her sore. And also, they're in this, like, fantasy world now where he probably doesn't even believe half of what she's saying because he's not sure what it's part of her fantasy sexual role play and what's true, right? And again, he has zero experience with any relationship, any woman. So he doesn't even know what a relationship looks like.
And he's flattered by the intention. Yeah.
So Colin asks, I do not understand what you mean. Do you mean physically, mentally, emotionally? Please explain. As I live a quiet life. I mean, he's almost telling her, bitch, don't come at me with your drama. Like, I'm not used to this. Britain says that if Colin is Rachel's killer, he'll try to secure sexual intimacy without putting himself at risk.
What does that mean?
I don't know what the fuck it means, because everyone trying to secure sexual intimacy should try to do it without putting themselves at risk. That's what I mean. It's like, who was reading this going, yep, makes sense. Sounds legit. Right? Like, sorry, if he put himself at risk, that makes him less likely to be a murderer? It just doesn't make any kind of sense to me or to anyone who's written about this case that I've read about. Now, Lizzie is pressuring and suggesting a phone call. So they haven't even spoken on the phone. He's seen a picture of her. She sent a picture. Obviously, it's probably not a picture of the actual undercover police. Oh, no, it must be a picture of who the actual undercover police officer. She's attractive. He's a 28-year-old virgin. So Colin is not the one that mentioned the phone call. And again, another example of how they are leading the whole conversation, the whole interaction, the whole relationship. She sends him a list of times that he can call because obviously they want to be recording it, etc., etc. She says she wants to confess her terrible secret to him. Terrible secret. Okay. Meanwhile, in 1993, April 1993, while all this Lizzie James, Colin Stagg relationship is going on, relationship in quotation marks, kids in Robert Napper's area are playing and they find a tin with a gun in it. Napper's prints are all over the tin. And even though he has a previous conviction for firearms offenses, 2 previous convictions, nothing is done. Like, he's still found with more weapons and nothing is done.
Why do they keep ignoring it?
So, also in this month, the same month, Colin, who doesn't have a landline, calls Lizzie from a friend's house, and she's annoyed about that. She insists he calls her from a phone box in future. And I'm guessing this is because the whole police operation, they don't want Colin talking to other people about it, and they don't want anyone overhearing or whatever. They want him to speak freely. And they don't want him getting like advice from friends because like
so he didn't have a landline.
No.
Interesting at a time with no mobiles.
Yeah. But again, very small life. This guy led a very small world. He had a very small world, you know. On this phone call, they just make small talk. They speak again later, and a couple of days later, Colin suggests meeting up. Colin then sends Lizzie a letter saying he loves her. He's always been open with her about his interest in the Rachel Nickell case. The guidelines set were that actually the police, i.e. Lizzie, was never meant to be the one to raise the Nickell case or lead questions about it, the Rachel Nickell case. It needs to come from him, right? But of course he's got an interest. It happened on his fucking doorstep.
Yeah.
On the park that he walks several times a day with his dog, you know? Again, small world. This is the biggest thing that has happened to him in fucking forever. So it's not a surprise. I mean, if it happened to us, we fucking are so obsessed with these kinds of cases, we have a podcast about it. On the 6th of May, 1993, they share another phone call, and Lizzie is properly hamming it up now. Are you the right man for me? Can you cope with what I've done in the past? She hasn't confessed what she's done in the past, but she's just keeps on going on about how bad it is, and she's not sure if Colin can handle it. Obviously, at this point, Colin is in love with her. He's written her a letter saying, I love you, you know? And I feel like he's likely to say almost anything to keep her, right?
How is this not entrapment, though? How is this not? It's feeding him lines,
you know?
But it's like literally feeding him lines. So how?
Listen to this. She even says she can't take the relationship further unless the man has done the same, in quotation marks. Colin says, what things are you talking about? And Lizzie says, quite bad things, really. Well, one particularly really bad thing. Colin says, I've been trying to guess. Lizzie says, I hurt people. Colin says, physically? Lizzie says, yeah. So Colin's fantasies are things like spanking her while she's wearing a school uniform, you know? Her fantasies are hurting people. And she's trying to imply that she's actually physically in real life hurt people. Again, I believe at this point, Colin still doesn't know what's real and what's not, what's part of her sexual fantasy role play and what's not. But it's, you know, his sexual fantasies are so fucking innocent. You know what I mean? They're
and you know what he is saying to her is, it sounds like it's just in order to please her.
Yeah.
Give her the answer she wants to build a relationship with someone that he thinks he loves.
So you remember how I said that they weren't meant to ask any leading questions, especially about the Rachel Nickell case, what they're actually trying to investigate in this whole operation? In another phone call, Lizzie says she wouldn't care if he had killed Rachel.
How was that permissible, and how was anything accurate after then? How was any of this accurate evidence after this point?
Open quote, it gets worse. Open quote, in fact, in certain ways, I wish you had, close quote. Colin says, I'm not into that. I think all life is sacred. Like, come on. So Lizzie insists they meet in Hyde Park, even though Colin is a bit uncomfortable going into the center of town, so they would know this about him. So keep him on the back foot, you know? They meet, and it's actually giggly and cute.
Mm-hmm.
And then Lizzie admits her dark secret, which is that she was in a satanic cult.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other women must have had a baby. I'm going to tell you that this is awful, but it's actually not true. Obviously, it's part of the backstory. So it's disgusting, but it's not true. So one of the other women in the satanic cult supposedly had a baby. They slit the baby's throat and they drank the blood. And then Lizzie slit the throat of the woman and drank her blood as well and loved it. So in this story, both the woman and the baby died as a result. Colin says he didn't believe her. You know, again, their relationship is so based on fantasy and sharing fantasies that he probably just thought it was more role-playing. Fucked up role-playing that he said he wasn't into. And he actually confesses he was quite disgusted by the depravity of her fantasies. But at this point, he's also a 29-year-old virgin. So he's had a birthday at some point, or I got the age wrong in the beginning. He felt that if he said that he either didn't believe her or didn't like where this fantasy was going, that it would end the relationship. Because she said that. She said, I want someone who can keep up with me, who can cope with this, blah, blah, blah. But Lizzie was not the one that was supposed to be introducing new ideas into his head and directing the conversation. And here she is, turning the conversation to killing, to, you know, drinking blood, like all kinds of fucking shit. And saying that she wants a man who's done the same thing and that she preferred it if Colin actually had killed Rachel Nickell. I mean, it's just obscene. It's obscene, isn't it?
I just don't know how this passes the police force's ethical guidelines.
Colin is actually overwhelmed by these fantasies. And the next letter he writes to her, he's actually starting to copy fantasies from men's magazines. He's run out of fantasies. He's like, my sexual fantasy is to have sex. Do you know what I mean? So the day after they met, Lizzie had told Colin that she killed... So the day after they met and Lizzie had told Colin that she has killed someone, he called her and said, you're aiming a bit high. I've never done anything like that. Her response was, oh, I'm going to have to think about this. You know, implying that unless he's killed someone,
So
their
how,
relationship is over.
even if he confesses at this point, how can that ever be considered a real confession?
Well, like I said, we'll talk about what happens when this evidence in quotation marks comes to the court. A couple of days later, Colin calls Lizzie and in quotation marks, he confesses to strangling a girl with his cousin when he was 12 in the New Forest. Okay, first of all, this was obviously fact-checked by the police. I shouldn't say obviously, because at this point, it's like, what are they actually fucking doing? It's fact-checked and it's completely false. So he's making up shit just because she's told him she's going to dump him, you know? But her response, anyways, was that, oh, well, that's not really the same, is it? Like, oh, you're a kid. I need something more serious than that. So she's basically entrapped him to confessing to a murder, and she's still saying, no, I want more. Okay, then Lizzie sends Colin a tape, which just is so 90s, of her dictating a fantasy involving knife play. The sexual fantasy involving knives. Remember, because Rachel Nickell was stabbed so many times and her throat was slit and everything. This is the first time that knives has come up in their fantasy chat. So again, she's leading and directing the conversation. He calls to thank her. And so she turns the conversation to Rachel Nickell. Again, something they said they weren't going to do. And she says, not only does she say, oh, remember that murder, blah, blah, blah. She says, I wish you had done it. Knowing you got away with it, I would have thought that's brilliant. Colin then told her that he was on the common when Rachel was killed and that she had been raped and decapitated. This is actually entirely incorrect. She was sodomized by an object, so she wasn't vaginally raped. And the fact that she had been decapitated was a rumor that was sparked. It was false. Her throat had been slit, but she wasn't nearly decapitated. It was so awful, but there was a photograph that had been taken of the scene because of some shadows and the angles kind of made it look like she'd been basically decapitated, but it wasn't true. And remember, he would have seen stuff in the press, stuff in his interviews. So, yeah. So basically, he gets key facts wrong about how she was murdered and what happened. At one point, Colin does a press interview. This just gets worse and worse. Lizzie expresses her displeasure at this with Colin. She says she's mad at him because she says that she wants it to be private, their relationship. He hasn't mentioned Lizzie in this, but that she doesn't want any kind of publicity, blah, blah, blah. And it's because Britain doesn't want other women to become interested in Colin and jeopardize their operation. So they don't want Colin to have a public persona, a public profile, in case other women contact him and he starts, God forbid, developing a healthy relationship with someone, you know, rather than carrying on this completely dysfunctional relationship and also entirely fake relationship and also one that's potentially going to end very badly for him. So they don't want him. They're ruining his life. They don't want him to have a genuine love life. You know what I mean? It's just so awful, isn't it? They're trying to keep him isolated so that they can manipulate him further. At this point, I'm going to take a break because I need one. And I need a coffee and a pee and fucking get my head together. Yeah? Okay.
Okay, let's go pee.
See you after the break. Okay, welcome back. Hope you had a nice break listening to ads or whatever happened, depending on what platform you're on. Anyways, we peed. It was nice. So, going back to the Rachel Nickell murder and the entirely unethical entrapment of Colin Stagg. I mean, you raised the interesting point, like, how could this even be deemed evidence? Because even if this guy was the murderer, there's to be the chance that this evidence is thrown out of court because it was obtained in such a questionable manner. So even if they really thought he was the murderer, which they obviously did at the time, they're risking their own investigation. It's so weird. It's so weird. Anyway, right. So July 1993. This is a year and a bit after, well, a year after the murder. One evening at 9:30 p.m., Robert Napper was outside of a house in Plumstead, peeping in on one of the residents who was walking around without much clothes on in her own house. So again, this is Napper coming up on police radar again. A couple living nearby called the police on him, and Napper tells them he's just on a walk. The police take his details and let him go, even though in the notes made by one of the police officers, he's written in his note, in quotation marks, possible rapist.
Oh, God. His file already has so many questionable incidents.
Right? And this guy still hasn't taken the DNA test when they brought him in for being a potential suspect of the green chain rapes.
I really hope people got fired for dropping the ball this badly.
I'll tell you about the aftermath, okay? On the 21st of July, 1993, Colin and Lizzie meet for the final time. So this is a year after the murder. Lizzie directs the conversation to Rachel Nickell. Again, not supposed to, but she does. And Colin shows her how the body was positioned. Now, remember, he's seen the picture during his arrest, the interviews. I can't remember if it was out in the press at the time. But here's the thing. So he's trying to show her how she was murdered or whatever. He did the wrong pose. So Lizzie says sometimes that he demonstrated her hands were in a palms together position. Something that was not public knowledge. But sometimes she says that he didn't do this. In any case, her palms weren't pressed together. Her hands were crossed at the wrist. the police that were watching this date, because obviously there was a lot of police surrounding when Lizzie, the undercover police officer, met up with Colin, they said they couldn't really corroborate whether or not how he showed the pose, whether it was a correct pose or not. But in their notes, they say things like Colin stroked Lizzie's hair and so forth. So they've managed to report on very intimate details, but not how he positioned his hands.
And did the police have an agenda just to wrap this case up as quick as possible or something?
Yes, they are obviously under a huge amount of pressure to wrap up this case, find the killer, etc., etc. Of course. Is that what kind of influenced their decision-making? Their poor decision-making, I think we can call it? Who knows? Lizzie kept asking what he meant by Rachel was gaping wide open. So Colin here is like trying to pretend to confess to this murder. Lizzie is asking him if he meant her anus or her vagina. And he always said it was her vagina. But we know this is incorrect.
Yeah.
She was not vaginally raped. Sorry, I know this is horrible, but I told you, it's key to the entrapment of this innocent man. I'm sure at this point, if Lucy said, I preferred it was in the anus, I'm sure at this point, if Lucy said, I preferred it if it was the anus, okay. I'm sure at this point, if Lizzie said, I preferred if it was the anus, Colin would have said, yeah, it was the anus, right?
Yeah.
And they would have taken that as evidence. Like, he's just saying shit that she's telling him to say. Lizzie says that she fantasizes that Colin is the man who killed Rachel. After this meeting, Lizzie tells Colin not to call anymore because she's moving to America. So they've got what they want from him, supposedly. He says he will send back her letters and tells her he lied about the murder.
He tells her he lied.
Yeah, sorry. I'm so sorry. He hasn't confessed to killing Rachel. He pretended that he had seen her after she died, which is not true. But he's saying that he lied about the murder when he was 12, which they already know about. They already know he lied about that murder. Lizzie asks to meet him again to say goodbye, and he says no because it will be too painful. Like, this guy, you know, like he was in love in his own weird way. Okay, let's bring Inspector Keith Petter back into the mix. He wraps up the operation nearly 32 weeks after it started, which is nearly double what Britain said it would take to get a confession out of Colin. He wraps it up because they weren't going to achieve the ultimate goal, in quotes, which is an outright confession. But rather than think that this must be because Colin is innocent, they hone in on him even more. They're like, no, he's still guilty. And remember, this was either to eliminate him or to get him to confess. He's not confessed. But they still don't view it as him having eliminated himself, even though he's given incorrect information. She's basically told him he has to confess. On the 7th of August, 1993, Inspector Petter arrests Colin Stagg for the murder of Rachel Nickell. In the interview, Petter tells him Lizzie James was an undercover cop, and the cop that was playing Lizzie then comes into the interview room and reads out parts of his letters with a face of disgust. Like, can you imagine this heartbreaking moment? This person he thought he was in love with, that he still is probably in love with.
I'm so sad about this guy.
And she comes in and she's reading back what he's written to her with disgust. It's just heartbreaking, isn't it? It's heartbreaking. The key evidence, in quotation marks, seems to be that Colin demonstrated with his hands how Rachel Nickell's hands were when she was murdered, that they were placed palm to palm. But as mentioned, that wasn't even the case. Her wrists were crossed over. So Colin is charged and he's awaiting trial, which he is told could take 6 to 9 months. Just so sad. Okay, so fast forward a couple of months now, a few months, to the 4th of November, 1993. A man called Conrad Elam goes to his girlfriend's house, Samantha Bissett. She doesn't answer, so he uses the key that he has. He doesn't normally just use it. He will always knock or whatever, but because she's not answered, he enters the property. He sees a large stain on the carpet and he sees Samantha in the lounge. He assumes she's asleep. He goes up to see Jasmine, Samantha's 4-year-old daughter, and assumes that she's also asleep. But actually, he sees that Jasmine has been sexually assaulted and is dead.
No.
She had been smothered by a pillow, and Samantha, the mum, the girlfriend, has been stabbed several times and cut from her pubic bone to her neck. Sorry, just felt a bit sick saying that. Again, fast forward a bit if you don't want to hear, because it does get a bit graphic, but I am only sharing stuff that I feel is relevant to all of this. The murderer peeled open her chest cavity. He tried to dismember her legs and took a piece of abdominal wall with him. Detective Superintendent Mickey Banks is a friend of Inspector Keith Petter, and so calls Paul Britton for help on this case. I don't know whether they've talked about this guy before, so he calls in the same Paul Britton. One question asked of Britton is, could this be the same man who killed Richard Nickell? But Colin Stagg is already in custody for that.
Rachel Nickell.
What did I say?
Richard.
Oh. One question that they asked Paul Britton is if this could be the same man who killed Rachel Nickell. But Colin Stagg is already in custody for that murder, and Britton thinks that Colin Stagg is guilty and basically put him away for it. So Britton gives a bunch of reasons why they definitely weren't perpetrated by the same person. The time spent on the body and with the body post-mortem, the abuse and the murder of the child. But we don't know whether the killer wanted to do something similar with Rachel Nickell and her body and her kid, but didn't have the opportunity because it was outside and because there were people around. Also, Jasmine was female and Alex was male. So going back to Ressler's criminal profile, he might have left Alex because he saw something in himself, in that child. He might not have had the same feeling.
And it's hard to find the words, not morality, you know.
Yeah, I was going to say relatability, but I don't like that. He might not have had the same inclination to a female child. Okay, so fast forward to the 17th of February, 1994, and Colin's hearing goes to court, which is by coincidence 2 weeks after a Crime Watch feature on Samantha Bissett and Jasmine on their murder. At the trial, each witness claims he was wearing different clothes when they saw him at different times. There was also a debate amongst the experts about whether the perpetrator could have done this and not been bloodstained himself. Because remember, we've had this conversation in like the bodies in a suitcase, saying like how bloody a dismemberment might be, or stabbings.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, and that actually, it's not necessarily.
Yeah.
Not necessarily going to be the case that it's bloody if you do it in the so-called right way.
And of course, Britton took the stand. And we already talked about his work and his views and stuff. Colin is thoroughly evaluated and found to have no mental illness, personality disorder, or deviant sexual behavior. Then in May 1994, fingerprint testing in the Samantha Bissett case matches to Robert Napper, who's 28 at the time and living in Plumstead. So this is the mother and daughter case. I don't know why it took best part of a year to get these fingerprints and match them, because we know they already had Napper's fingerprints on file from when they found his fingerprints on a tin containing a gun. By the way, Napper does not match Britton's profile in so many ways. So I don't know whether Napper actually came up on Britton's radar, whether he was ever asked, but we know that Napper does not meet Britton's profile. Napper was working for the Ministry of Defense, so he wasn't unemployed or on the fringes of society. And also,
how did he get a job when he's got some sort of police record?
I don't know. And also, he had previous convictions, but not for sex or violence, but for firearms. After police
didn't exclude him from working for the Ministry of Defense? What the fuck?
Don't know. I don't know what his role was in the Ministry of Defense, but the point was he was within society, not on the fringes. After police get Napper's fingerprint match, they consult with Britton again, even though they knew Napper is violent, and they have DNA matches. On Britton's advice, they decide to surveil him rather than arrest him. They followed him for 10 days, which is really risky considering how violent he is. On the 27th of May, 1994, Napper is arrested and denies everything. Even though he's got diagrams of how to dissect people, maps like before, you know, like how he was found with maps that show all these different positions of like where he had attacked and raped before. He's got maps like before, but with Samantha's house marked up. They also start linking Napper to the Green Chain rapes through DNA and loads of other assaults as well. So they finally get his fucking DNA and start linking him to all these other cases. On the 5th of September, 1999, before Colin goes to court, hang on a second. Oh, I'm not entirely sure. Let me just Google what, I'm not sure I got the year right. What year was Colin acquitted? Okay. So, basically, Colin goes to court and his case is acquitted. The judge says that the aim of the undercover operation was to eliminate Colin as a suspect or implicate him, but it was highly disingenuous and deceptive conduct of the grossest kind. Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It was disgusting how they were able to do that. He went on to say that even when Lizzie was basically begging him to admit that he was the murderer and made out that their relationship depended on it, Colin still said he was innocent. And when he did confess, in quotation marks, he got crucial details wrong. The judge goes on to say that Paul Britton was pulling strings and ruled that the Lizzie James material would not go to the jury. And then the case fell apart because there was nothing else linking Colin to this in any way. But obviously, at this point, they didn't have another suspect at this point when he was acquitted. Mm-hmm. So, and technically being acquitted isn't the same as being found innocent. So some people, i.e. the tabloids, still viewed him as potentially guilty and hounded him. Mm-hmm. And he was victim to like such horrible things. For example, an escort tried to get him to have sex where Rachel was murdered, and she had a photographer lying in wait. I mean, he obviously didn't want to do that. This guy's
life was ruined.
I haven't even begun
to tell you. Oh no, this will literally define the rest of his life.
The cop who played Lizzie James received £125,000 compensation for trauma experience, because obviously she's quite low on the chain here and she's just told what to do. Mm-hmm. I don't know very much about at what point she was like, hang on a minute, this isn't right. Mm-hmm. But, and the thing is, right, again, this is why we should care about the shit. That's £125 of taxpayer money. Mm. So not only would this operation have cost a fuck ton of money, but the amount of compensation that has to be paid out when people are wrongly imprisoned or treated in this manner, it's all out of our pocket. And that money should be spent elsewhere and better. We shouldn't be committing these problems in the first place to warrant having to pay these. I mean, the compensation is not what I have a problem with. If you're fucked about in this way, you deserve that money. Best of luck to you. But we shouldn't be in a position where we are having to pay out this huge amount of taxpayer money on this rather than actual policing or other areas, right?
Yeah.
Colin also was eventually awarded compensation to about £700,000. Again, taxpayer money. So 13 months after Colin's acquittal. So for 13 months, this guy spent months and months in prison, got acquitted, and then spent 13 months still guilty in the public eye. November 1995, Robert Napper, who has been charged for the Green Chain rapes and the Bissett murders at this point, goes before the Old Bailey to determine if he's fit to stand trial. 5 psychiatrists said that he was paranoid schizophrenic or schizophrenic. And while they are debating his fitness to stand trial, Napper agrees to plead guilty to manslaughter on the ground of diminished responsibility and on 1 count of rape and 2 counts of attempted rape. Napper is detained indefinitely. But listen to this, right? It still gets worse. It gets so much worse. Colin wanted to sue Paul Britton, but he had to wait because independent lawyers also brought the case to the disciplinary committee of the British Psychological Society. Guess who Britton's barrister was?
Who?
Keir Starmer.
You're fucking joking.
Keir Starmer.
No.
Okay, so Keir Starmer's argument, I hate this guy, was that Britton could not get a fair hearing mainly due to the passage of time, which is interesting because his argument isn't that Britton is innocent. The board accepts this argument and the case against Britton is dropped. But by this time, so much time has passed that Colin is no longer entitled to sue Paul Britton for his actions. Okay, so we normally have a section on hashtag fuck the Tories, but here we could say hashtag fuck New Labour, Tories in disguise.
Exactly, I was just going to say that, yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Wolf
Fast forward 10 years after the murder. So Robert Napper is in prison for the rapes, alleged rapes, attempted rape, not alleged rapes. He's in prison for the rapes and attempted rapes and the murders, the Bissett murders. 10 years on, they still don't have anyone for Rachel Nickell, though. It's an open case, but it's very cold. Until in 2002, Scotland Yard review it, which normally means they check over to see if there's new advances in forensic science since the case happened that can be used. So November 2004, so again, a further 2 years on, DNA that was found on Rachel Nickell was eventually matched to Robert Napper. Once he is a suspect, the police find loads more. A shoe print next to the crime scene that matches Napper's unusual trainer, flecks of paint from Napper's toolbox, which he kept his murder kit in, was found in Alex's hair. Napper wasn't allowed to be interviewed because of his mental health. And so they were only able to interview him June 2006. So 13 years after the murder. And they had to wait for his condition to improve. So remember, this whole time, Colin is still living a life of someone who is basically seen as guilty of this murder. And it's only in November 2007 that Napper is charged with Rachel's murder. He pleaded not guilty, but eventually changed his plea to guilty to manslaughter and sentenced to detention without limits of time. Okay, so that's not it. I went further. I had found out at this point that Colin Stagg had also written a book called Pariah, which I showed you. So obviously I had to read that. But in my research, I found out that he even met up with Paul Britton 30 years later because he wanted to move on. Paul Britton maintains...
it's commendable, but...
It's commendable. It's noble. I couldn't. Paul Britton maintains that it's the police's fault anyways. And the police obviously say that they were following advice from Paul Britton. So I ordered Pariah by Colin Stagg. Let me get it for you again. You can see a picture of Colin today. Don't ask me. I know don't at me. I know I've chosen 2 books by people obviously on the same side, quotation marks, but I made it very clear that neither of the books I've read are unbiased accounts, and I did read loads of articles online, but the facts of it are that Colin is not guilty and Napper is. So, and I think when you read the fucking cases, you could see how awful this whole investigation was. Keith Petter also has a book, so does Paul Britton on the case, but you know what? I cannot bring myself to give either of them money. I can't. Mm. You can at me. If you've read these books, tell me about them. I would love to know what's in them. I just cannot bring myself to buy them.
I hope Paul Britton has the weight of his conscience on his shoulders.
And look, I know that making such an operation must be tough. I couldn't do it, but I'm not an expert, you know, and I just wish that these experts in quotation marks would admit the same if it's something that's beyond their capacity, if they're out of their depth, you know, rather than carrying on with even more conviction, even though they have no fucking clue what they're doing. People's lives are at stake here. Anyway, back to Colin's book. Remember, he was in jail for a year in 1993 and 94 before being acquitted. And then he was only really, truly cleared in the eyes of the police and the public in 2008 when Napper was finally found guilty. The book was actually first published in 2006. So at that time, Napper had been charged with the murder, but not yet gone to trial. Weirdly, even before I start reading the book, it opens with an acknowledgement with, you know, like a lot of books. Colin acknowledges Keith Petter. Like, lists him in his acknowledgements, and I'll tell you more later about that. Okay, so I'm already on page 1. I'm emotional, right? This is going to make you sad. I'm really sorry, but...
Oh, no.
Because I quote from his book. This is the words of Colin. "The life I had enjoyed was stolen from me. I might have seemed like a lowlife in many people's eyes, but my life had been my own and I liked it. Now I have no idea how it might have turned out."
You know, I'm so sad about this guy. I'm so sad about this guy because he's a vulnerable guy, you know.
He is the guy you see down the pub, enjoying a pint on his own. Do you know what I mean? Like,
you know, and also, you know, the way he's described as a loner and the way he's clearly vulnerable. And even when you mention overwhelmed about going into central London, he fits the profile of an autistic person. And obviously he's of the age range where most people weren't picked up if they were deemed quote unquote high functioning. And obviously this is not my professional opinion because I'm not a psychologist, but there's a lot there to indicate that
he was just
a vulnerable person.
Slightly unusual loner, very lonely, very isolated, not that many friends or whatever. We all know people like this, you know, and they are vulnerable because they don't have the support network and the social networks that a lot of us are lucky to have. Anyways, do you want to know Paul Britton's fee during all of this? I don't know how much they spend in total, but his hourly fee, £300 an hour. And you know he racked up fucking time on this case. Colin goes into the letter exchange between him and Lizzie and why he wrote certain things. Because obviously he did write a bunch of questionable stuff, right? Which out of context can look bad. And you know people took them a lot out of context. I had to skip a lot of it because I just felt so bad at him for how emotionally tricked he had been. And then like having to publish this stuff. Imagine having to publish your intimate thoughts and conversations with a loved one that you think is private. Imagine having to publish it for the world to see and then having to justify and explain yourself. Like, it makes me cringe, you know? The book covers the period that Colin was in prison. He said while he was in prison, he started getting letters, a hybristophiliac, let's say, from a lady called Diane Bedos, I want to say. He eventually marries her when he comes out and divorces her. She was open with him about her drinking problem. And that's what seemed to have led to the downfall of their marriage. I mean, how is this guy going to have like a normal relationship after all this, you know? Like, internally, he must
have trust issues.
Trust issues, all kinds of issues. Externally, the amount of pressure from people, you know, if it gets out that he even has a girlfriend, and then like how to find a partner that can deal with all of this publicity and background.
Did you ever get an apology from Lizzie or from Paul Britton?
Not from Lizzie. I feel like the fact that she was traumatized and got compensation says a lot, right?
It does, but we wouldn't be capable of tampering with somebody in that way. Oh. Okay, maybe she really felt that he was the murderer, you know, but at the same time, even from the perspective of an ethical police person, you know, police officer.
I don't know, but let me go on because I do go into a lot of detail about the fallout from Colin's point of view as well. He also got letters while he was in prison from a lady called Lee. She's an older lady. They weren't romantic. They seemed to be more like supportive, you know, and they actually went on to be friends for life. So like, well done, Lee. You seem to be just an honest, good person. When he came out of prison, Colin's 31 and he's still a virgin, you know? So Diane met him at a hotel. He was being put up in a hotel by, I think, a newspaper that was going to get a story from him, whatever. And he lost his virginity. He then was reunited with Brandy, his dog, and they went back to his flat. And they spent ages, like, cleaning it up because obviously the police left it in a state after all the searches. He's been gone for like a year, etc., etc. Diane and Colin, they're getting hate mail, they're getting death threats, they're getting threats in the streets, they're getting abuse, they're getting threats to the children if they ever have any. They're getting sworn at, they're getting their windows broken, etc., etc. Like, Colin thought when he got released and when he was acquitted, it would end, but it, you know, that it would blow over eventually, but it didn't. Diane was scared, understandably, and Colin stupidly took to carrying a hand axe around with him. It's like, I get it, but it's also not a good look. Yeah. So they're out for a walk one day, and a guy calls Colin a wanker. So Colin pulls out the knife, the axe, and waves it around. The guy actually beat the shit out of Colin because he's not a fighter, you know? Colin, quite rightly, gets done for carrying an offensive weapon, but also for assault, and the guy got charged with nothing. So it's like, is there still some sort of police
conspiracy at this fucking stage?
Diane started applying pressures to get married, and with the rest of the world hating Colin, Colin didn't want to be alone. So even though he had doubts, they got married. Their work opportunities were really limited because obviously even if someone did fully believe that Colin was innocent, the drama around them. Yeah. So Diane starts working on a sex chat line, you know, from home on the phones, but even they fired her when they found out who she was. She becomes fixated on wanting a baby, and Colin is like, fuck no. Like, he's not sure about the relationship, and also he doesn't want to bring a kid into this scary situation. I mean, remember, they've even had threats on their unborn children. So, you know, I really get the impression through everything that Colin is like, yes, a little bit odd, but like fairly decent and kind of switched on in a way, like maybe not the most socially adept person, but not completely fucking stupid.
No.
He gets approached by a filmmaker and a crime writer. That's two different people, a filmmaker and a separate crime writer. I don't even want to say their names because they don't deserve any publicity. The films were like, they were basically live operations and executions, including real footage. And they wanted to make a film reconstructing the murder, but focusing on the actual murder, you know, like gruesome, and then have the phone-in verdict from the audience. They wanted Colin to be involved. Why the fuck would we want to be involved in that and have the risk of like all these people judging him again, potentially judging him guilty again when he's been acquitted of this case? The crime writer convinced Colin to hand over loads of original documents, including the book that he had been working on in prison and the original Lizzie James letters. So I don't know whether they managed to convince Colin that this would be good, that they will finally prove his innocence. I don't know. He promised Colin that we would help him get his book written and published, but actually he was just bringing all of these documents around to start a bidding war. They were telling people in the press that they had promised Colin a pervy trip to Thailand. And listen to this. When Diane heard this, she left him. It wasn't even true, but she is a very jealous person. And she read in the press that Colin's going to Thailand to have sex with all these fucking people in Thailand. She left him.
Poor guy.
I know. He was worried about her, but he really need not have been, because she was staying in a 5-star hotel in Kensington on the dime of the Mail, another scum of the earth paper. She had promised to sell her story and her secrets about her life with Colin.
I mean, look, she was a questionable character from the start.
I know. I just hate everyone around him.
I do. I know. This poor guy, it just makes you so sad that somebody just had their life turned upside down, didn't deserve any of it. Wrong place at the wrong time.
I know. She tried to come back to Colin after the story was published, even though she said that she had even started to wonder if Colin was the murderer. Colin eventually gets his book back, which I presume eventually becomes this book, Pariah, but never got the Lizzie James letters back. Life with Diane, meanwhile, is getting worse and worse. One time, Diane was drunk and causing a scene outdoors, and the police turned up, and she got arrested. It took 7 police officers to subdue her, and she kicked one of them, so she's charged with the assault of a police officer. Turns out she had previous convictions that Colin didn't know about, so she spent 4 weeks in Holloway prison, which is the women's prison.
What were her previous convictions? Do we know?
I don't know. When she came out, she was even more moody than before. And it turns out she had another man on the side. A rapist coming to the end of his sentence. Ironically, this rapist was one of Colin's friends in prison. Colin didn't know what the man was in prison for. And we hear that sometimes on TV shows, that they don't talk about what they're actually in for. I don't know how actual that is, how factual, or how, you know, whether that is the case. But Colin claims he didn't know what this guy was, what he was in prison for. And that when Colin left prison, he actually introduced Diane to this guy because she came with him once or twice when he visited this guy in prison. I actually believe that Colin didn't know he was a rapist, because I feel like that would have been very against his moral compass. Colin says in his book he would never have introduced his wife to a rapist if he knew that's what he was. I definitely don't think he would have brought his wife in to meet her, even if he managed to spark up some kind of friendship with someone he served time with. So this guy's name is Gary Howe. So obviously I Google him, right? Presuming I found the right guy, he was jailed for 8 years in 1993. So this lines up with when Colin was in jail. Sorry. I couldn't tell if he actually served those 8 years, but he was in jail for raping 2 teenagers and having underage sex. Like, if there can be worse than rape, it's worse. It's raping someone underage, right? I mean, that just making me feel really sick today because it's so nauseating, isn't it? Oh, sorry. Diane moved out to wait for Gary's release, but even his family, i.e. the family of a convicted rapist, struggled to cope with her drinking. Gary's mum even called Colin to complain about Diane. I mean, what the fuck does she think Colin's going to do about it? When Gary finally is released, he dumps Diane within days, and Diane goes back to Colin. She comes to him with a proposition. He's reluctant to let her back in his life. She said if he agreed to take a truth drug test, she would come home and share the $20,000 she would get from the scummy News of the World for him taking the test. Which I'm like, what? So if he takes the test, she gets $20,000. I mean, surely he could go to the News of the World and be like, look, I'll take the test.
This woman
you give me the $20,000 directly. I mean, why would he even need her as like the middleman, you know? But Colin's lonely, and he says like, this is always his weakness, and the money would have helped, so he agreed. Like, I get the impression that, you know, both him and Diane pissed the compensation money up the wall. So he agreed to take this truth test. Diane comes back to him. He takes this truth test. I don't know how reliable truth serum is. The test proves that he's innocent, but there's a discrepancy on timing of his visits to the Common that day. So the paper claimed that Colin had lied to the police and refused to pay his fee.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
One day, Diane leaves Colin for good, and Colin is okay with that at this point. I think by that point, he'd had so fucking much, he's like, bye, Felicia. He's since then had a few failed relationships, including that escort, who I mentioned tried to get him to have sex on the Common and to be photographed secretly doing that. He even, like, bless him, makes fun of how naive he was in that scenario. But it's like, that must have hurt, you know?
This guy's just been taken advantage of left, right, and center.
Then Colin has an entire chapter on how he feels sorry for Keith Petter, the guy that took on Paul Britton and followed his instructions. In an ironic twist of fate, he ends up having sympathy with Keith, who trusted an expert to know what he was doing and got fucked in the ass as well. And he, Keith Petter, was totally used as a scapegoat on the police force.
Mm-hmm.
He retired for health reasons almost immediately after the Lizzie James operation. So he had all the evidence of the people further up the hierarchy and the police approving and applauding the Lizzie James operation. And he was planning on publishing a book on this, but the police were so annoyed about this. So when Keith Petter was working as a consumer security consultant, he realized that the man he was targeting, I don't really understand this, but basically he was investigating or something, a man.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell if he was trying to protect him or he was investigating him or whatever, but he realized that this guy was being followed by the police. Like, he noticed that the police were surveilling him. He didn't want to jeopardize an existing police operation. So he called an old colleague of his who was still on the police force, and he says, is there an operation? Because I'll back off if there is. I don't want to mess it up for you guys. Mm-hmm. It turns out the target was a violent criminal. The force made out that Petter was asking for case information rather than just clearance whether or not to continue with this private job. Mm-hmm. And that he paid £100 for this information that he obtained illegally. So they basically set him up, to discredit him further, so that if he releases this book that says, it wasn't my fault, all of these superiors above me approved this operation, we're happy with this, they are the ones, the buck stops with them, they're discrediting him in advance. Mm. Keith Petter was only charged 9 months later, and the judge ruled the undercover evidence was unsafe, which is ironic because this is exactly what happened to Colin, Petter also, they tried to frame him. They used an undercover cop to do this. Petter also criticized the treatment of Lizzie James after the operation, the police officer posing as Lizzie James. Mm-hmm. She was only given routine jobs afterwards, and she was managed out of the force. So we know she wasn't. We know she wasn't happy with the operation because she applied for compensation. She went on sick leave with stress and eventually left entirely. She brought civil action against the Met and got her payout. So I don't know whether it's because she knew too much at that point, or whether she was already voicing that she wasn't happy with how that operation went, or who was getting the blame for it. But they basically, again, worked on discrediting her and pushed her out entirely. At this point, I Googled Alex Nickell, the son of Rachel Nickell, because he's an adult now. And I found a Bustle article by a lady called Elle Hunt, which was published on the 2nd of February, 2023, so really recently. Alex and Andre moved to France. They traveled around a lot. They lived in Barcelona as well for a while. Alex came to London to study for a while, and now he's back in Barcelona. It seems like he's a yoga teacher. And I just want to say, we wish him all the best. I doubt he's listening to fucking podcast episodes about that horrible period of his life.
It's so sad. I will never get over, the one detail I really remember from this case is that he was there.
Yeah, it was, because it was chilling. So Andre and Alex also seem to recently be
and
trying
I hope he has no memory of it. I really hope.
Do you know there was, sorry, I left this out because it was traumatizing, but I'm going to mention it now. There was a bit of paper with her PIN code on her forehead when they found Rachel Nickell, and they for ages were wondering whether this was some kind of evidence clue or whatever. And it was actually, I think, something she had in her pocket or her bag or whatever. And the son, age 2, had put it on her head like a plaster, like a Band-Aid to try to make her better.
This is so fucking sad. Jesus Christ.
So Andre, the partner, and Alex are trying to bring a claim, it seems, against the police for compensation. Because, all of this would have tormented them longer and harder than they needed to be, right? So back to Colin. Bless him. In 2003, there was a news release that Colin's DNA sample had been destroyed. I presume accidentally during his acquittal, and that Colin had declined to give another DNA sample. In all actuality, Colin had been begging to replace his DNA sample. He had to fight with a lawyer to be able to give his DNA. For some reason, the police didn't want him to. And he even had to try to use media pressure to get them to accept his DNA.
And why were they refusing?
I think because it wasn't going to help prove what they wanted to prove. And they're clearly hell-bent on making him look guilty. And then in 2004, the DNA is finally linked to Robert Napper. So I don't know whether they already knew that the DNA did not link to Colin Stagg, and so they didn't want to have a repeat evidence that it wasn't Colin. Okay, did this stop the persecution of Colin, though, when Napper was convicted? No. He still gets persecuted. He still gets hate mail. He gets abused in the street. And for a while, the headlines just focused on how he wanted to claim his millions. I'm sorry, they ruined his entire life. His work opportunities, fucking everything, you know?
And hindered his safety after his release.
And as of like 2 weeks ago from recording, he was back in the news again announcing that he's homeless. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Since Napper's arrest, Paul Britton has come forth again and tries to claim he never thought the Lizzie James letters were a good idea, even though they were his idea, and he justified all his actions in his own book. So there we have it. A case with a multitude of direct and indirect victims.
Do you know, I was just going to say this.
There were loads of opportunities to lock up Napper before he killed. And I don't know if you clocked the timing, but if they had managed to get him for Rachel Nickell, he would not have been able, while they had Colin in jail, wrongly to kill Jasmine and Samantha.
Yeah.
So how are you feeling?
You know, the quieter I am during episodes is because it's just the more fucking sad it is. And yeah, obviously the Rachel Nickell case, I remember it. Not in detail, obviously, because we were really young when it happened, but I do remember the detail of the son, and that's where, as soon as you mentioned it, I thought, oh God, that key fact will always haunt me with this story, that her son is there. And I just pray that he, at his age that he was then, has no memory of that. And of course,
but you know what, shit, hopefully he doesn't have memories of that actual day, but he probably does, and he most definitely will have memories of the aftermath.
Yeah. Exactly. And Colin, you know, I've only seen the dramatization, but it's just so sad because I want to find out more about him, because I remember in the dramatization, obviously it's not based 100% on fact like you said, but yeah, he was portrayed as, you know, a vulnerable loner, and I just feel like this poor guy, we've said it so many episodes for in a variety of contexts, but you can literally just be going about your business, you know, literally just be going about your business, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and your life blows up, you know, and that was what happened to him. He was the wrong place at the wrong time, and literally his life.
He wasn't even in the wrong place. He was fucking at home.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He was just the wrong type of person at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I wanted to go into detail. Like that dramatization, really good. Do watch it if you haven't already. It is really interesting. But again, like I said, it's a dramatization. It doesn't even go into, you get like little cutscenes of Robert Napper, but it doesn't go into that side at all. It focuses purely on the Lizzie James scenario. And I wanted to go into more detail about the aftermath on this one. What happened to Colin Stagg afterwards, up until this day? It's been now 30 years since that murder. Almost to the day. What, fuck, hang on a second. Yeah, almost to the month. No. 31 years, okay? It's been 31 years since this woman, bless her, was murdered. Do you know what I also find interesting, just on an aside? She had done like some part-time modeling. She'd done a few model jobs, but they still talk about the model that was murdered on the Common. Like, that makes it more sensational or valid. I don't know what. I mean, to me, she'd done so many other things. I'm not saying better or worse than modeling, higher up or lower on the, I just think it's funny that of all the things, they picked like the thing she did probably once or twice and called her a model, rather than the fact that she had studied at university. She didn't graduate, she had a kid, but you know what I mean? It was just that she'd been a lifeguard. I don't know, all this other stuff. It was just...
That's newspapers.
Sells more newspapers, exactly. I mean, she was fucking gorgeous. And we know that that does generate more media attention, public interest, and so forth. If that's being used to try to get a positive outcome, i.e. catching the murderer, great. If it's just a ploy to sell more papers, then fuck you. Yeah, so I just wanted to go into more detail about how this poor guy, like you say, wrong place-ish, not even at the wrong time, wrong personality type at the wrong time. How it not just fucked up his life temporarily, it fucked up the rest of his life. Like he said in his own words, I don't even know what my life could have been. And chances are he wouldn't have like become prime minister or won a Nobel Peace Prize. But this man, you can tell, would have been quite happy just finding another cute little weirdo to marry, settle down with, and just have a quiet life.
Well, that's it. It broke my heart when he said in one of his letters to Lizzie that he just wants a quiet life.
Yeah.
And that's what's so fucking sad. You know, obviously the murder, the impact on her son and her whole family, but also this guy who didn't do a damn thing wrong. You know?
Yeah.
So it's fucking sad. I hate it when you finish an episode and I just feel so fucking sad.
Because we always talk about, I know, we always talk about how obviously there's more victims than just the people that have been murdered. It's everyone around, anyone involved in that case is probably suffering as a result in some way. The family, the loved ones, the people wrongly accused, you know?
And the injustice of this, all the injustice of it, the shoddy police work, the injustice that really just blew up Colin's fucking life.
I mean, it's the double prong of just being so lax with Robert Napper when he kept on coming back on the radar, and being so proactive to the point of being unethical with Colin Stagg, right? It's like they've made their mind up. He's our guy. We're just going to do fucking everything to get this one guy, even if all the evidence links, proves, shows to...
And Samantha and Jasmine are two other victims as a cause of, you know...
Yeah, I wonder if their family have taken it further, or...
Oh, God. It just, it really is just a case of... We've said it so many times, but shit can happen to you that you don't expect that will fuck with your life, you know? And it's, you know, we always say it, that part of our fascination is down to just being very anxious people concerned for our safety and the safety of our family. And cases like this, you know,
literally opening up a can of wine because I need it after that. It's the afternoon now. Yeah,
but this you know, walking through the park with your baby, you know, in the middle of the day or in the morning, you think you're safe. In your home, like the woman that got raped in her home with her kids downstairs. Samantha and Jasmine in their homes, you know? And no matter how safety conscious
you can be. And like the fucking Samantha's partner. One of my worst fears is the thought of ever finding any of my loved ones murdered. Them being murdered and me being the one to find them. To have that every time you close your eyes. Oh, yeah.
And that's the other fucking terrifying thing, though, is that, no matter how safety conscious you are, you know?
Listen, we've got a dilemma now. Because we can't end the season
just Let's talk about something good. We have to talk about something good. And I'll tell you what's really good.
What?
Is that we've just had a fucking great time this whole season doing this. And we really, well, you know, great time other than these fucking depressed feelings at the end of hearing Deanna's cases.
Sorry. But, do check out our merch. Why don't you go shopping in our break? Because now we have Just Tell Me the Fucking Story merch. And also, Wake Up and Smell the Hummus merch.
Ah, yes! I love it. Did we say that in the season?
You did, and I loved it. I've been saying it ever since.
I
Wake up and smell the hummus.
I fucking say that.
You fucking said that.
Do you know what? Having a podcast does? It's like holding up a mirror so close to your face that it's uncomfortable.
For a start, literally, because we spend a lot of time on Zoom looking at our faces.
Yeah, oh God, Friday's the only day that I put makeup on and put a decent fucking outfit on, although I hate that dress I'm wearing today. But anyway, that's an aside.
Cute. I'm wearing our merch.
Oh, well, you look great.
I'm when the weather in my pajama shorts because it's fucking hot today.
Yeah, well, that's what I was just gonna say. You know, when the weather suddenly gets hot, and which is weird for England, you're like, shit, I don't have any summer clothes. So you go on eBay and just buy the first fucking thing. That's what happened. That's this dress. But yeah, having a podcast, literally, it's like one of those like super magnifying mirrors where you're like, oh shit, do I say that? Oh shit. Like one thing I realized is I'm not good on camera. I don't fucking you look at the camera and you look good on camera.
Yeah, but I look at you and I think you look good. I'm like, how have I had this much Botox and fillers and I still make all of these weird faces?
You too. Yeah, when I'm editing your reel and I have to get the like cover for the reel, I'm trying to look for that split second when you're not making a funny facial expression. But,
I know, it's hard. I have to do the same thing on YouTube.
But when I'm editing the reels, I'm like fucking hardly ever have my face like to the fucking camera or my eyes at the fucking camera. But also, it makes you realize, for me, and I can't say this for you, I've realized how fucking annoying I am at the fucking phrases that I say over and over and over again. That I'm just like, what? I didn't even know that I fucking said that. And now it's all I hear whenever I do listen back to her.
You know what?
Like,
Can I just say, you know what would be awesome to end the season on? It'd be awesome to be like, we're ending the season and going on a break because we're going on a live tour.
Wow.
That would be cool. Maybe that's how we'll end season 2. Hey, maybe do a poll and see if people would want to do that. If they want to even see us live. They'd be like, no.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The last time we did a poll was on who's going to come to CrimeCon with us next time.
Yeah, and one of my dearest friends said no, even though
said you're fucking losers.
Yeah, even though it hurt more because we'd just been to this CrimeCon with her. She said, oops, I did it by accident. I thought it would be funny. It's like, it's not fucking funny.
But yeah, I mean, the other positive thing.
Oh my God, I know exactly how we can end on it because I wanted to do this to Isla. It's my friend Isla. She's opening up a true crime bookstore, a true crime and murder mystery bookstore in New York. So keep an eye out. Follow it on Instagram. It's more information to follow. Criminally Good Books York. My friend Isla. So I love her very much. But yeah, she did fuck us in that poll. So yeah. I'm going to fuck her up now. You know what's coming. She was telling us a story about how she has a daughter, right? She has a daughter who's 5 years old, and one of her friends had come to stay the night, and this friend got scared and needed comforting. I feel for her because I was always that friend that got scared on sleepovers. And so Isla, I don't know did you understand if this girl was Polish?
No, I don't even think that matters. The story.
I don't even know who's Polish in this story. But to comfort this girl, Isla had to sing a Polish nursery song on repeat for 10 minutes. And we were like, fucking sing us the song. And so I'm going to hold up. Let's hope this sounds good.
You're about to lose your best friend.
I got other friends. I love you, Isla. This is for voting wrong on the poll.
I can't believe I'm doing this. Kotkidwa, Saroburi Odiwa, Nigni Bitaro, Tai Lucy Biboio. I mean, obviously it sounded a lot better last night when I had backing singers. But listen, they fell asleep after 10 minutes.
10 minutes of that!
That song was a fucking tune. No one's gonna trust us ever again.
I mean,
but you know what? You know what else? I want to do a fucking roundup, a quick summary, if I may. Of the season.
I tell you what. Let's start with favorite episode.
I can't.
Oh, and I'm worried it's going to turn dark again because I was just
favorite based on what? Favorite guest?
Yeah, I know.
Do you know what I'm going to say? I do have a favorite episode. It was the most lighthearted one, and that was reality TV. It combined my two loves. Reality TV.
I thought you were going to say Belle Gunness.
Oh, Belle Gunness. I felt like it was like I could laugh during the episode at times. And I didn't feel, because it was so long ago and there were some comedy moments, I was able to actually enjoy some of it. But the reality TV, that was a gift from you and Sarita to me.
And I've got plenty more gifts coming.
Oh, I can't even
now
wait.
I understand surprises that you like.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say it's the only surprises I like. Because you know what's funny? The extent to which I don't like surprises is that even if it's something that I like, I'll still be anxious about it. For example, CrimeCon, you booked it as a surprise for me in October.
No, I didn't. I told you.
Well, you booked it. You surprise booked it.
Did I? I thought I told you that I was booking it.
No, you booked it. You're like, oh, I bought this for us.
Oh, okay.
And then, so that element of surprise and anxiety associated with that lasted with me until June. 8 months. Even though I wanted to do it, I was like, shit, I didn't plan this. This is not what I usually do when it's
I gave you from October to plan.
I had, yeah, well, you gave me 8 months to plan it. I also had 8 months of anxiety, which is so stupid. Because it just, yeah, I had to like arrange the kids. I had to move some of my work that I do the news website. Unpredictabilities aren't good for me, even if it's something I'm looking forward to. But yeah, reality TV, best fucking episode. What was yours?
Probably, I feel like the Levi Belfield one came out with a lot of exciting stuff.
Oh.
But my favorite one that you did was, and by favorite, I mean most traumatizing, but one I knew maybe the least about. No, because some of them I'd never even heard of before. But the one that I still think about is the Lululemon one, because it was just, I mean, even yesterday at the MailChimp conference I went to, what did they put up? They were comparing, it was e-commerce-y, right? So they were comparing the Lululemon mobile website, what their shop looks like on a mobile. So it was totally random, but I saw Lululemon come up and I was like,
fucking cunts. Yeah, exactly. That's what I think every time I see it pop up.
Never working for you, never buying from you.
Buy Sweaty Betty instead if you want posh yoga clothes.
Yeah. Or Asquith.
Oh, Asquith, I like them too. That's actually, one of my
And they very often use, I mean, they're quite pricey. They're even pricier than Sweaty Betty, but they quite often use bamboo, which is sustainable and antibacterial. So it actually helps reduce the smell and all that kind of stuff.
They seem to always have a sale. So yeah, buy Asquith instead. But do you know what? We've had some, and really, I think we need to fucking actually give ourselves a pat on the back, because this started as me and you. And I thought, not much, when you proposed this to me, us doing a podcast together, I was like, shit. I'm juggling 2 kids. I drive 4 hours a day for the school. I work 6 days a week. When the fuck am I going to do a podcast? And that was my only worry. And you convinced me that will make it manageable. Had I known anything to do with the workload it was going to take, I probably would have been like, no. But you said, just do the socials. You're like, don't worry, I'll even present the episodes. And I was like, no, I can't be the Brit. For those who listen to Crime Junkie. Brit
has her own role, but Rhonda didn't want that role. Brit's great.
No, Brit is
she's the producer.
Oh yeah, she does that. Yeah.
She's the producer, so she's just kind of the sounding board. She's not meant to be the presenter. But Rhonda didn't want to be the second character. Well,
I wanted to pull my weight, and otherwise you're just the person being like, oh wow, oh god, I don't want to be that person.
Instead we alternate being that person.
Yeah, I wanted to pull my weight because Deanna does a lot, even proportionally. Deanna does more than I do for this podcast, but I thought, we're not going to have many listeners. This is just going to be a fun thing we do just for us. And then the listenership built, and then we met amazing people along the way that listen and who we absolutely love.
Like other podcast opportunities, TV opportunities, speaking opportunities, writing opportunities, social media work opportunities. We've launched our course.
Well, this is it. Initially, I was like, okay, we'll do the podcast. I don't have time for a hobby, so I'm going to have to make this have some financial gain, because it's giving up a day's work, and I work 6 days a week so that I can earn enough, you know, because 5 days a week when the kids are at school is not enough hours to earn enough money. So then, you know, I said, okay, well, we'll promote some of our services. And then I said to Dee, let's make a course. You know, I was a teacher. I love making resources. Let's make a course. And I'm so proud of our course. You know, it's a 120-page course on how to podcast with video tutorials. It's everything you need. It is everything you need from conception to fruition. And then you got us Steve Gaskin. I was like, fucking hell, we got a guest on the show. You know, former DCI detective came on our fucking show. Then you got us Colin Sutton. And I'm like, fucking hell, these high profile people. Colin Sutton said this is the best podcast in a crowded market in the you know, true crime world. Then we got Dr. Brian Fredericks. Then we got Sarita, who's a massively well-known, highly revered content creator. And we've got, you know, we have Stephen Keogh, another former Scotland Yard detective. We've had, as you said, you know, been asked to...
We've got Neil Root.
Yes, writer. You know,
we've got Cherry from Crimepedia.
Yes,
Crimepedia.
another massive podcast. We've been asked to do casting for a documentary. The opportunities that have come from doing a podcast, when I look back on it, it fucking blows my fucking mind that this started off as coercing me into doing a podcast that I thought we'd have no fucking listeners for.
And
you know,
I know we started on a little bit ahead, because we started off the back of a podcast that had been going for several years, We Knew the Moon, which, check out the episodes with me and Rhonda. It is very similar format to this one, right? Where we alternate telling each other some kind of information about a specific spooky or dark topic. So we did start this podcast off the back of that. So not entirely from scratch, but we've only been going a few months. How cool is that? I can't wait. I cannot wait. I literally cannot wait to see where we go with this.
And it really, I hope it gives other people the drive to start their own, you know, because it's opened up our world, and we've met amazing people along the way, had amazing opportunities, had a lot of fucking fun.
Yeah.
And I'm fucking amazed.
I want to put a little promise out there, a little guarantee. We haven't officially put a money back guarantee on our course, but we should emphasize 30-day money back guarantee. But if you take our course and actually do it, and therefore start a podcast off the back of it, and if we are at all relevant to your podcast, because you might not even fucking want this, we'll come guest on your podcast. Right? And
we love you guys so much. We love you. And if you have enjoyed this episode of this season, we would really appreciate it if you could give us a rating on Apple Apple and Spotify, and bring us back to 5-star, hopefully.
No, because I want to say something. Do you know something like 98% of our listeners have not left us a review or a rating?
Wow.
So I would like to ask all of you to do us this favor of going on to whatever platform you listen on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever you listen on, and leave us a review or a rating. We'd really appreciate it. I cannot tell you how much it helps with the algorithms. So thank you so much for listening anyways.
And thank you so much for helping keeping this shit show on the road.
Yeah. And we'll see you next season for even more crazy fucking shit. Love you.
Love you. Bye. Hey there. Thanks for being a loyal listener.
Do you need a new website or want to boost your social media performance? Or do you hate podcast editing? You've tried optimizing your website and social media channels, but you're still not getting the listeners, downloads, and engagement you want?
We, the Safier sisters, love helping people with tasks that they hate. We know a thing or two about podcasts, websites, and social media, and we love working with other podcasters and business owners.
So why not head over to switchbladesisterssocialclub.com and go to our Work With Us section. We believe in collaboration over competition. A rising tide raises all ships.
Bye!